A 6-year-old boy stands alone in the middle of a frozen highway at dusk. No coat thick enough, no adult in sight. Nothing but a faded superhero backpack and a question that will shatter a man who hasn't felt anything in 15 years. The bikers who find him aren't heroes. They're the Iron Vultures, scarred, violent, wanted by half the law in Blackstone County. But tonight, something in that child's voice cracks open a darkness none of them were prepared for. Because the boy didn't run from the storm. He walked into it, looking for someone strong enough to save his mother. If you stay until the end, you'll understand why this story changes everything. Drop a like, leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from, and let's ride. The snow came sideways across Blackstone County like something personal. Not the soft kind that collects on window ledges and makes people think about holidays. This was the other kind, the kind that erases roads. The kind that kills engines and buries cattle and makes the 6 o'clock news anchors tell everyone to stay inside and lock their doors. Wind chill pushed the temperature below zero before sunset, and by the time the sky turned that sick purple-gray color that means the worst hasn't started yet, most of the county had already shut down. Gas stations closed early. The elementary school on Ridgemont pulled its buses off the road at noon. Even the Blackstone County Sheriff's Department ran skeleton crews. 3 deputies spread across 400 square miles of frozen nothing. Nobody was supposed to be outside. Nobody with any sense. Knox Callahan didn't have sense. He had engines. He stood inside the repair bay behind Harlan's roadside garage, with his hands buried inside the cracked cylinder block of a 1987 Harley Softail, grease up to his forearms, cigarette smoke curling from an ashtray balanced on a transmission case 3 feet away. The garage smelled like diesel and old rubber, and the faint chemical sweetness of brake fluid that had leaked onto concrete so many times, the floor was permanently stained in overlapping black rings. Knox was 41. Former Marine. 2 combat tours in places the VA didn't like to talk about. Road captain of the Iron Vultures Motorcycle Club, Blackstone County chapter, which meant he planned the routes, managed the rides, and kept the brothers in line when the president wasn't around, which was most of the time, since Bull Langston spent half his life in a fishing cabin pretending the club didn't exist anymore. Knox was built like something assembled for damage. Wide shoulders, thick forearms covered in faded tattoos that blurred together under grease stains, a face that looked like it had been carved out of bad years, deep lines around the mouth, a nose broken twice and reset once, and eyes the color of frozen creek water, gray-blue. Still, the kind of eyes that watched everything and gave nothing back. He didn't talk much. He didn't need to. The men who knew him understood what the silence meant, and the men who didn't learned fast. He finished the cylinder job just after 4 o'clock, wiped his hands on a rag that was already blacker than anything it could clean, and pulled on his leather jacket. The Iron Vulture's patch across the back was faded at the edges from years of wind and rain and highway sun. A vulture perched on a crescent wrench, wings spread wide, the words Blackstone County stitched underneath in block letters that had once been white and were now the color of old bone. He kicked the Softail to life and rolled out into the storm. The highway was empty, just white. A long white throat stretching into nothing, bordered on both sides by skeletal trees and barbed wire fencing buried under drifts. Knox rode at half speed, his headlight cutting a weak yellow cone through the snow, his visor already collecting ice. The cold ate through his gloves in minutes. His knuckles ached, his jaw tightened. He almost missed the shape in the road. A small dark figure standing motionless in the right lane of County Road 14, maybe 200 yards ahead, barely visible through the curtain of falling snow. Knox's first thought was animal, deer maybe, coyote. Then the shape moved, shifted its weight from one foot to the other, raised one arm to shield its face from the wind. Knox throttled down hard. The rear tire slid 6 inches on ice before the tread caught. He came to a stop 40 feet from the figure and killed the engine. Silence hit like a wall. Just wind, just snow, and a little boy standing alone in the middle of a frozen highway. Knox pulled off his helmet and stared. His breath came out in clouds that the wind ripped apart instantly. The boy couldn't have been older than 6. He wore a thin blue jacket zipped to his chin, jeans soaked dark from the knees down. Sneakers that were never designed for weather like this. His hair was plastered flat against his forehead. His lips had gone the wrong color, and clutched under his left arm was a cheap superhero backpack. Cartoon lightning bolts across the front panel, the fabric faded and peeling at the seams. The boy didn't cry when Knox approached. He didn't flinch, didn't step back. He just looked up with eyes that held something Knox recognized from a place he'd spent 30 years trying to forget. Exhaustion. Not the physical kind. The kind that lives behind a child's face when the world has already taught him that crying doesn't work. "Hey," Knox said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. He dropped to one knee in the snow, bringing himself close to the boy's height. "Hey, what are you doing out here?" The boy's teeth chattered so hard his jaw barely worked, but he managed to speak. "How do I make my mom stop crying?" Knox didn't move. The wind screamed across the open road and threw snow into his face, and he didn't blink. He just knelt there, one knee soaked through on the frozen asphalt, staring at this child who had walked into a killing storm carrying a question no 6-year-old should ever need to ask. "What's your name?" Knox asked. "Eli." "Eli what?" "Mercer." "Where's your mom, Eli?" The boy's lower lip trembled, not from cold, from something worse. "She went outside after the man broke our table. She was crying, and she went outside and she didn't come back." Knox felt something shift in his chest. Not emotion exactly, more like a wall cracking, a pressure change behind his ribs that he hadn't felt in years and didn't want to feel now. He pulled off his leather jacket and wrapped it around the boy. The thing swallowed Eli completely. Sleeves hanging past his hands, the bottom hem dragging in the snow. But the boy grabbed the lapels and pulled them tight around himself and breathed in the smell of leather and engine oil, and something he apparently found safe enough to stop shivering for 3 seconds. Knox reached for the radio clipped to his belt. "Harlan, you there?" Static. Then a voice thick with cigarette damage. "Yeah." "What?" "Get Bull. Get whoever's at the clubhouse. I need bodies on County Road 14. Now." "In this?" "Knox, the roads are now." He clipped the radio back and looked at the boy. "We're going to find your mom." Eli stared at him with those exhausted eyes and said nothing, but he reached out with one frozen hand and grabbed Knox's wrist. The grip was so small and so desperate that Knox had to look away for a moment because something behind his eyes was threatening to betray him. Within 12 minutes, 3 motorcycles materialized out of the storm like apparitions. The sound hit first, that deep guttural thunder of heavy V-twins echoing off frozen farmland, growing louder until the headlights split the snow in 3 parallel beams. They pulled up in formation and killed their engines one by one. Deacon climbed off first. 6'3", former Army combat medic, a thick beard frosted white at the edges and hands the size of dinner plates. He carried a medical bag everywhere he went, a habit left over from 2 deployments where he watched men bleed out in places that didn't have names on any map. Behind him came Rio, the youngest patched member at 26, a wiry kid from the foster system who talked too much and fought like something feral when cornered. He had a blanket rolled under his arm before Knox even asked. Last was Harlan himself, the garage owner, club treasurer, a barrel-chested man in his late 50s with a silver ponytail and a limp from a wreck in 2009 that put a titanium rod in his left femur. He took one look at the boy wrapped in Knox's jacket, and his face went hard in a way that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with recognition. They'd all been versions of this kid once. Every one of them. "What do we know?" Deacon asked, kneeling to check the boy's hands and feet. His medic voice, calm, clinical, steady. "Name's Eli Mercer. Mother's missing. Someone broke into their apartment. She ran out in the storm." Knox kept his voice flat, but his eyes were moving, scanning the road, the tree line, the drifts piling against fence posts. "He walked here from town, alone." Rio crouched beside Eli and held out the blanket. "Hey, little man, you like hot chocolate?" Eli nodded slowly. "We got some at the garage, the good kind, with the little marshmallows. You want some?" Another nod. Rio wrapped the blanket around Eli's shoulders over the leather jacket and scooped him up like he weighed nothing. The boy didn't resist. He just pressed his face against Rio's chest and closed his eyes, and for a moment nobody spoke because nobody trusted their voice. Knox watched the boy disappear into Rio's arms and felt something he hadn't felt since the last time he stood in the doorway of his childhood home watching his mother pack a suitcase she never finished packing. He wanted to break something. "Deacon, take the boy to the garage, get him warm, don't let him out of your sight." "What about you?" "I'm going to find his mother." Harlan stepped forward. "Knox, you don't even know where He said the man broke their table, said men have been coming to the apartment yelling about money. Knox's jaw clenched. "This is Grady." The name landed like a grenade with the pin pulled. Harlan's face changed. Rio stopped walking. Even Deacon, who rarely showed anything, went still. Vincent Grady. Everyone in Blackstone County knew the name. Everyone who had survived the last decade, anyway. Grady was a loan shark, drug trafficker, an underground gambling operator who had spent 15 years building a network so embedded in the county's economic collapse that half the struggling families in town owed him something. He didn't advertise. He didn't need to. When the hospital bills hit, when the unemployment check stopped, when the bank said no and the government said wait, Grady said yes. And then he owned you. He'd used bikers as enforcers back in the old days, before the Iron Vultures cleaned house and cut ties with every criminal operation that had rotted the club from inside. Knox remembered those days. He remembered a night in a parking lot behind a strip mall when he'd beaten a man unconscious for missing a payment, a man he later learned was a single father working 2 jobs. Knox had stood over that man's body in the sodium light with blood on his knuckles and realized he had become exactly the thing he'd spent his childhood hating. That was the night he stopped. That was the night the old Iron Vultures died and something harder and quieter took their place. But Grady never stopped. He just found new muscle, new methods, and apparently new victims. "Radio the sheriff," Knox said. "In this storm, radio the sheriff." Harlan made the call. Knox rode with Rio and the boy back toward town while Deacon headed to the garage to set up a warm space, and Harlan waited on the roadside for the law. The apartment was on the east side of Blackstone, Decatur Heights, a neighborhood that had been dying slowly for 20 years. 3-story brick buildings with water-stained facades and windows that hadn't been replaced since the 90s. Broken porch lights, cracked sidewalks buried under ice, a dumpster overflowing with black trash bags that the collection trucks hadn't reached in weeks. Eli pointed to a second-floor unit. The door was open. Not ajar. Open. Hanging at an angle like someone had kicked it hard enough to crack the frame. Knox went in first. The apartment was small. 2 rooms plus a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. The kitchen and living area shared the same space, separated by a counter covered in unopened envelopes, bills, collection notices, final warnings printed in red ink. A lamp lay smashed on the floor, the shade crumpled, the bulb shattered into fragments that caught the hallway light like tiny teeth. Broken plates spread across the linoleum near the sink. A wooden kitchen table lay on its side with one leg snapped clean off. And on the floor near the table, a smear of blood. Not a pool. Not enough to mean the worst, but enough to mean violence. Enough to mean someone was hurt and afraid and alone somewhere in this storm. Knox stood in the center of that wrecked kitchen and breathed through his mouth because the apartment smelled like cheap cleaning products and fear. That sharp, sour, electric smell that lingers after adrenaline floods a room and leaves nothing behind but silence. He looked at the refrigerator. Photographs held up by magnets, a woman and a boy at what looked like a county fair, both smiling, both sunburned, both holding cotton candy the size of their heads. Another photo. The same woman sitting at a diner booth in a waitress uniform, Eli on her lap, both making faces at the camera. Mara Mercer, late 20s, dark hair pulled back, eyes that were beautiful and tired in equal measure. The eyes of someone who smiled for her son and saved her collapse for after bedtime. Knox memorized her face. Then he heard boots on the stairs. Sheriff Lena Brooks came through the broken door with one hand on her service weapon and snow melting in her short brown hair. She was 44, lean, sharp-featured, and had been running the Blackstone County Sheriff's Department for 6 years with a budget that couldn't cover gas most months and a county government that treated her like an afterthought. She had 3 deputies on shift tonight. One was stuck in a ditch on Route 9. Another was handling a domestic call 12 miles south. The third was a rookie who'd been on the job for 7 weeks and looked like he might cry every time his radio crackled. She looked at Knox, then at the blood, then at the broken table. "Where's the boy?" "Garage. Deacon's got him. He's warm." Brooks nodded. She pulled on latex gloves and crouched near the blood smear, studying it without touching it. "Apartment manager says the tenant is Mara Mercer, single mother, waitress at the Double Arrow Diner on 5th, behind on rent 3 months. She borrowed money from Grady." Brooks looked up sharply. "How do you know that?" "The boy told me. Hospital bills from last year. Grady's been sending people to collect. Tonight one of them broke the table and she ran." Brooks stood slowly. Her jaw worked like she was chewing on something she didn't want to say. "Knox, this is a police matter." "Then police it." "I have 3 deputies, one of whom is currently learning how to drive in snow. I have no backup until the storm clears. I have no warrant, no witness statement on file, and no jurisdiction over anything Grady operates outside county lines." She paused. "What I do not need is you and your boys riding into something that turns into a shooting. There's a woman out there. I know. In this storm, hurt, with Grady's people. I know." They stared at each other across the wrecked kitchen. 2 people who had spent years on opposite sides of an invisible line that neither of them fully respected, both knowing the line didn't matter tonight. "Stay out of my way," Brooks said. "Stay in front of me," Knox answered. Brooks turned and walked out. Knox heard her radio crackling as she descended the stairs, calling for the state police assistance that both of them knew wouldn't arrive for hours. He went back to the garage. Eli was sitting on a metal folding chair near the repair bay, wrapped in 2 blankets and Rio's hoodie, holding a cup of hot chocolate with both hands. The cup had a faded logo from a gas station 2 towns over. The boy held it like it was the most important object in the world, his fingers wrapped tight, his eyes fixed on the brown surface like he was trying to see something in it that wasn't there. Deacon stood nearby checking his medical bag, restocking it with quiet efficiency. Rio sat on an overturned milk crate cleaning his boots, his leg bouncing the way it always did when he was angry and trying not to show it. Knox pulled a chair over and sat across from the boy. "Eli." The boy looked up. "Can you tell me more about the men who came to your apartment?" Eli's hands tightened on the cup. "They yelled a lot." "How many?" "2, sometimes 3. One had a brown jacket. He smelled bad." "Did they ever say a name?" "The scary one. The other guys called him Grady." Knox's blood went cold and hot at the same time. What did Grady look like? "Old. Gray hair. He smiled, but it wasn't a real smile." Eli paused. "He told my mom she had to work for him. She said no. He said she didn't get to say no." Rio's boot cleaning stopped. "When was this?" "Last week, maybe. I don't know. Mom told me to stay in my room, but the walls are thin." Eli's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "I heard her crying after he left. She cried for a long time. Then she got real quiet." Knox sat very still. "Eli, this isn't your fault." The boy looked at him with eyes that were too old for his face. "That's what my mom says. But she cries every night after I go to bed. I can hear her through the wall." Something broke inside Knox's chest. Not dramatically, not visibly, just a small, quiet fracture in a wall he'd spent decades building. A wall made of silence and distance and the carefully maintained lie that not caring about anything was the same as being strong. Because he'd been this boy. Exactly this boy. 8 years old, lying on a mattress on the floor of a house that smelled like whiskey and burnt food, listening to his mother sob behind the bathroom door at 2 a.m. while his father's truck idled in the driveway and the whole house held its breath, waiting to see if the engine would shut off or the truck would leave. Knox never saved her. He spent his entire childhood watching his mother get destroyed by poverty, by violence, by a man who treated her like something he owned. And he never saved her because he was too small and too scared and too convinced that he was the reason it was happening. By the time he was old enough to fight back, she was already gone. Dead at 39 from a stroke the doctors said was stress-related, but Knox knew was something else entirely. Something that doesn't have a medical name. Something that happens when a person simply runs out of reasons to keep their heart beating. He looked at Eli Mercer and saw a ghost of himself sitting in that metal chair, holding a gas station cup, waiting for someone to tell him it would be okay. And for the first time in years, Knox wanted to be the person who said it. Not because it was true, but because somebody should have said it to him once, and nobody ever did. Then Harlan came through the garage door, stamping snow off his boots, his face carved with urgency. Prospect found something. Knox stood. What? Bike tracks, fresh ones, heading north on the old fire road toward Eagle Creek. Harlan pulled off his gloves and rubbed his hands together. That's Grady's hunting property, 40 acres of nothing, cabins, trailers, the whole compound he used to run his operation out of before the feds spooked him underground. How fresh? Within the hour, maybe less. The snow's filling them in fast. Knox looked at Eli. The boy had stopped drinking his hot chocolate. He was watching the men with wide, alert eyes that tracked every movement, every shift in tone, every hardening of a jaw or clenching of a fist. Kids who grow up in violence learn to read rooms the way other kids learn to read books. They measure danger by the angle of a shoulder, the speed of a breath, the distance between a hand and a door. Eli was reading the room right now, and what he read scared him. Are you going to find my mom? Knox looked at him. Yeah. Promise? The word hung in the garage air between engine oil and cold steel and the distant howl of a storm that wasn't finished yet. Knox Callahan didn't make promises. He'd learned a long time ago that promises were just debts you couldn't afford to default on, and he'd defaulted on enough in his life to know the cost. He didn't promise the Marines he'd come back whole. He didn't promise the club he'd stay clean. He didn't promise anyone anything, because the moment you promise something to someone who needs it, you become responsible for their pain when you fail. But this boy was looking at him the way he once looked at every adult who walked through his childhood, searching for one who wouldn't leave. I promise. Eli nodded once, small, serious. Then he went back to his hot chocolate. Knox turned to Harlan. Call every patched member, everyone, prospects too. Tell them to gear up and meet at the North Junction in 30 minutes. Knox, the mountain roads, 30 minutes. Harlan studied him for a long second. Then he nodded and reached for the radio. Knox walked to the far end of the garage where his bike sat cooling, pulled on his gloves, and stared at the concrete floor where decades of oil had pooled into shapes that looked like bruises. Deacon appeared beside him. The big medic didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, solid and quiet, the way he always did before things went bad. You know what's up there, Deacon said. Yeah. Grady doesn't play small. He'll have men, armed. Yeah. And the sheriff? She'll come, or she won't. Deacon paused. This is about the boy. Knox didn't answer. Knox, I've known you 11 years. I've seen you walk into things that should have killed you and walk out like you were disappointed they didn't. Deacon's voice was low, careful. This one's different. I can see it. It's not different. You're lying. Knox looked at him. Deacon held his gaze without flinching. One of maybe 3 people on Earth who could. That kid is sitting over there blaming himself for his mother's pain, Knox said. He thinks he caused it. He thinks if he were better or quieter or smaller, she wouldn't cry. His voice dropped to something barely audible. I know what that does to a person. I know where it leads, and I'm not letting it lead there. Deacon was quiet for a moment. Then let's go get his mother. Knox zipped his jacket. The radio crackled to life with voices checking in from across the county. Rooster, Slade, Whitley, Patch, Dominguez, Jenks. Brothers confirming they were rolling despite the storm, despite the ice, despite every rational reason to stay inside. Because that's what the Iron Vultures did. Not anymore for money. Not for territory. Not for any of the reasons that used to define them. For the thing that came after all, that burned away. Knox walked back toward Eli one more time before heading for the door. The boy was almost asleep, his chin dropping toward his chest, the cup tilting in his loosening grip. Rio gently took the cup and set it on the floor, then pulled the blanket tighter around the boy's shoulders. Eli's eyes fluttered open just long enough to find Knox across the garage. Mister? Yeah. The man with the bad smile. Grady. Eli's voice was drowsy, thin, fading. He told my mom there was no one coming to help her. He said that. He said no one was coming. Knox felt the words land in his chest like rounds. He looked at this boy. This small, frozen, impossibly brave boy who had walked into a blizzard searching for someone strong enough to stop the world from hurting his mother. And he made a second promise. This one silent. This one only to himself. He was going to find Mara Mercer alive, or he was going to burn Vincent Grady's world to the ground trying. He stepped into the storm without another word. The wind hit him like a fist. Snow swarmed his face, his neck, the gap between his collar and his jaw. He swung onto his bike and kicked the engine to life, and the deep rumble shook through his bones and into the frozen earth beneath him. Behind him, headlights appeared through the white chaos. 1 set, then 2, then 5, then 8. The iron vultures assembled on the highway in a staggered formation, engines thundering, exhaust clouds rising into the storm like smoke signals from a war that hadn't started yet. Knox pulled onto the road and pointed north, toward the mountains, toward Grady's compound, toward the dark, frozen nowhere where a woman was either alive and waiting or already beyond anyone's reach. And somewhere behind him, in a warm garage lit by fluorescent bulbs, a 6-year-old boy slept against a stranger's shoulder, dreaming of the moment his mother would stop crying. He didn't know yet that the men riding into the storm for her were carrying something far more dangerous than weapons. They were carrying a debt that every single one of them owed to a childhood no one had rescued them from. And tonight, for the first time, they intended to pay it back. The mountain road north of Blackstone was a throat of ice. Knox led the formation up the switchbacks at 30 miles per hour, which was 20 faster than sane and 10 slower than he wanted. The wind came down off the ridge in gusts that shoved his front wheel sideways, and every time the tire slipped, he corrected with his knees and his core and the muscle memory of a man who'd been riding through things that should have killed him since he was 19 years old. Behind him, the iron vultures climbed in a staggered line. 8 bikes, headlights stabbing through the snowfall, exhaust clouds swallowed instantly by the dark. Nobody spoke on the radio. Nobody needed to. The formation held tight, each rider watching the taillight ahead of him, each engine note blending into that collective thunder that rolled through the frozen pines like something geological. Harlan rode second position, his big road king swaying on the icy curves, his face locked behind a half-visor frosted white at the edges. Behind him came Slade, a former Navy mechanic who'd lost 2 fingers on his left hand to a training accident in Norfolk, and never bothered with prosthetics because he said the stumps reminded him to pay attention. Then Rooster, a rangy ex-corrections officer who'd quit the state prison system after watching an inmate get beaten to death by 3 guards and doing nothing to stop it. Then Whitley, Patch, Dominguez, Jenks, men whose histories could fill a filing cabinet at the VA and whose reasons for riding tonight had nothing to do with heroism and everything to do with debts they carried in places that didn't show on the surface. Rio and Deacon had stayed behind at the garage with Eli. Knox hadn't explained why he wanted Deacon there. He didn't need to. Every man in the club understood that if tonight went wrong, if the mountain took them, or Grady's men took them, or the storm buried them in a ditch somewhere between here and Eagle Creek, someone had to survive to take care of the boy. That someone was Deacon, because Deacon was the only one Knox trusted to do it right. They'd been riding for 40 minutes when Harlan's voice crackled through the radio. "Knox, pull over." Knox didn't answer. "Knox, I'm serious. Pull the hell over." He found a turnout where the road widened near a collapsed guardrail and swung his bike to a stop. The others followed, engines idling rough in the cold, headlights overlapping in the snow. Knox killed his motor and turned in the saddle. Harlan dismounted heavily, favoring his bad leg, and limped through the snow toward Knox. His breath came in thick white bursts. His gloves were soaked through. He looked like a man who'd been arguing with himself for 40 minutes and lost. "We need to talk." "Talk." Harlan stopped 3 feet away, close enough that his voice wouldn't carry to the others over the wind. You're riding us into a compound owned by a man who has killed people, Knox. Armed men. In a blizzard. On mountain roads that haven't been plowed since November. He paused. Without a plan. The plan is to get there. That's not a plan. That's a direction. Knox stared at him. The snow fell between them in thick curtains that made Harlan's face appear and disappear like a signal flashing. You got something to say, Harlan. Say it. The older man's jaw worked beneath his beard. He glanced back at the line of bikes, at the men sitting in the cold watching this conversation happen, reading it the way they read everything, by posture, by distance, by the angle of Knox's shoulders. I remember the last time you went after Grady's people. The words landed in the space between them and sat there like a loaded weapon. Knox said nothing. Parking lot behind the Eastgate Strip Mall. 2014. You beat Tommy Sievert so bad they had to wire his jaw shut for 3 months. Harlan's voice was steady, but his eyes were sharp, measuring. Tommy was behind on a payment. Grady sent you to collect. You collected, and then you kept collecting long after the job was done. I know what I did. Do you? Because right now you've got the same look on your face, same jaw, same eyes, same dead-nothing expression you wore when you walked out of that parking lot with blood all over your hands and acted like nothing happened. Harlan stepped closer. You're not riding up this mountain for that woman, Knox. You're riding up there for yourself, and that scares the hell out of me. Silence. The wind filled it with howling. Knox climbed off his bike slowly. He stood in the snow facing Harlan with his hands at his sides and his back to the formation, and for a long moment neither man moved. You're right, Knox said. Harlan blinked. I beat Tommy Sievert because I liked how it felt. I liked the way his face changed when I kept hitting him. I liked the sound. Knox's voice was flat, factual, surgical. I liked it because every time I hit him, I was hitting my father. Every time I heard him scream, I was hearing every sound my mother made that nobody ever answered. And when it was over, I stood there looking at what I'd done, and I realized I was exactly the man I swore I'd never become. Harlan said nothing. That was 10 years ago. I haven't touched a man in anger since, not once. And yeah, I'm going up this mountain, and yeah, it's personal, and yeah, I know what's sitting inside me right now. Knox paused. But there's a kid in that garage who walked 2 miles through a blizzard because he thought bikers looked strong enough to fix things. And his mother is up there. And I'm going to get her. So you can ride with me or you can ride home, but either way I'm going. Harlan studied him for a long time. Snow collected on his shoulders, on his silver ponytail, on the frozen creases of his leather. Bull should know about this. Bull's in a fishing cabin pretending the club doesn't exist. He's still the president. Then he can be president from his cabin. I'm the road captain. This is a ride. My call. Harlan exhaled through his nose, a long, slow breath that looked like smoke in the frozen air. If you lose yourself up there, I'll put you down myself. Fair. I mean it, Knox. I know you do. They held each other's gaze for another second. Then Harlan turned and limped back to his bike without another word. Knox mounted up, kicked the engine, pulled onto the road. The formation followed. But something had shifted. Knox could feel it in the spacing. The bikes behind him had opened up by half a length. Subtle, almost invisible. The kind of distance men create when they're not sure if they're following a leader or chasing a problem. He noticed. He didn't blame them. The fire road toward Eagle Creek branched off the main highway 7 miles further north, marked by nothing but a dented metal post and a chain that had been cut sometime in the last few hours. Fresh tire tracks in the snow, truck tires, wide and deep, led through the gap and disappeared into the tree line. Knox stopped at the junction. Headlights appeared on the highway behind them. Not motorcycles. A county sheriff's cruiser moving fast, chains on the tires throwing sparks off the ice. Sheriff Brooks pulled up and stepped out into the storm. She wore a tactical vest over her uniform and carried a shotgun across her chest. Behind her, through the cruiser's windshield, Knox could see the rookie deputy gripping the steering wheel with both hands, his face the color of old paper. Callahan. Sheriff. You're going in. Yeah. Brooks looked at the tire tracks, then at the cut chain, then at the 8 motorcycles idling in the snow behind Knox. I've got 1 unit, 1 rookie. No backup until state police can clear the highway, which isn't happening for hours. She shifted the shotgun against her shoulder. I can't authorize this. I didn't ask. If any of your men discharge a weapon, I will arrest them. Understood. If anyone dies up there, this is on you. It was already on me. Brooks stared at him through the falling snow. Then she did something that surprised him. She walked to her cruiser, opened the passenger door, pulled a detailed topographic map from the glove box, and spread it across the hood. Grady's compound. I've been building a case file for 2 years that nobody in the county prosecutor's office wants to touch. She traced the map with her finger. Main access road runs north half a mile to a clearing. 3 structures. Main cabin here, equipment shed here, and a trailer they use for storage, or whatever they're calling it this month. The cabin faces south, single door, 2 windows. If he's got men posted, they'll be at the tree line on either side of the clearing. Knox studied the map. How many men? Last count, 6 to 8. Grady doesn't keep an army, he keeps enough to make a point. Armed? Assume yes. Shotguns, handguns. Grady carries a .45 he likes to show people at dinner parties. Brooks folded the map. You go in loud, they'll scatter or shoot. Either way, someone gets hurt. Knox looked at the formation behind him. Harlan, Slade, Rooster, the others. Men he'd ridden with through things that didn't get talked about in public. Men who'd followed him into situations that made this look like a traffic stop. We go in loud, Knox said. Brooks closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them, something had changed. The professional distance she maintained like a uniform had cracked just enough to show the exhaustion underneath. My deputy and I will approach from the east fire trail. It feeds into the back of the compound behind the equipment shed. Give us 15 minutes to get in position. She paused. You hit the front, draw their attention. I'll move on the cabin from behind. Okay. If Mara Mercer is in that cabin, I'm getting her out, not you. Me. In my jurisdiction, under my badge. She's a victim and a witness, and I will not have this compromised by some vigilante rescue that gets thrown out in court. Fine. Say it like you mean it. I'll get you in the door. You get her out. Brooks held his gaze for a long 3 seconds. Then she turned, walked back to the cruiser, and climbed in. The rookie deputy stared at Knox through the windshield with wide eyes. Brooks said something to him that Knox couldn't hear. The kid nodded. The cruiser reversed, turned, and disappeared down the fire trail heading east. Knox checked his watch. 15 minutes. He turned to the formation. Listen up. The men leaned forward on their bikes, engines rumbling, faces hard in the headlight glare. Grady's compound is half a mile up this road. 3 structures. Armed men in the trees. Sheriff's coming in from the back. We're going through the front. He scanned their faces. Harlan's granite calm, Slade's focused stillness, Rooster's coiled tension, the younger rider's barely controlled energy. Nobody carries a weapon past the gate. Nobody. Slade shifted on his bike. Knox. Nobody. We go in with bikes and noise and numbers. We draw fire to the front. Brooks gets the woman out the back. If someone shoots at you, get behind your bike. Do not shoot back. And if they don't stop shooting? Rooster asked. Knox paused. Then I'll handle it. Handle it how? The way I handle things. Nobody asked what that meant. They all knew. 12 minutes passed in near silence. Men checked gloves, tightened boots, adjusted helmets. Harlan smoked a cigarette down to the filter with hands that didn't shake, which impressed Knox because his own hands hadn't stopped trembling since he'd picked Eli up off that highway. Not from cold. From something older than cold. Knox's radio crackled. Brooks' voice, thin and static-laced. In position, east side. 2 sentries visible at the tree line. Cabin lights are on. I see movement inside. Knox keyed the mic. Copy. We're coming in. He looked at his brothers one last time. These men. These damaged, difficult, dangerous, broken men who had no business being anyone's salvation and yet kept showing up for it anyway. Ride loud, Knox said. He dropped the clutch and hit the gas, and his front wheel threw a rooster tail of snow as he tore up the fire road. Behind him, 8 engines opened up in unison. That wall of sound, that deep-chested mechanical roar that traveled through frozen ground and rattled dead branches and announced itself to every living thing within a mile. They rode in tight formation through the trees, headlights blazing, engines screaming, the sound bouncing off the mountain walls until it sounded like 20 bikes instead of 8, like an army instead of a handful of ex-soldiers and reformed criminals riding through a blizzard because a 6-year-old boy asked them to. The compound appeared through the snow, a clearing cut into the mountainside, pine trees pressing in from all sides. The main cabin sat at the center, a flat-roof structure built from logs and corrugated metal, smoke rising from a stovepipe chimney, warm light glowing through 2 dirty windows. To the left, the equipment shed, its big door partially open, darkness inside. To the right, a double-wide trailer sitting on cinder blocks, no lights, windows covered with plywood, and at the tree line, exactly where Brooks said they'd be, 2 men standing in the shadows with shotguns. The sentries turned at the sound of the bikes. One of them raised his weapon. The other grabbed a radio. Knox didn't slow down. He rode straight through the compound gate, a gap in a half-collapsed chain-link fence, and skidded to a stop 30 feet from the cabin door. The other bikes fanned out behind him in a semicircle, engines still running, headlights creating a wall of light that pinned the sentries in place and turned the snow into a burning white curtain. For a moment, nothing moved. Just engines, just snow, just the wind carrying exhaust smoke through the trees. Then the cabin door opened. A man stepped out. Not Grady. Younger. Hard-looking. Shaved head. Denim jacket over a thick frame. A holstered pistol visible at his hip. He squinted into the headlights with one hand raised against the glare. The hell is this? Knox sat on his bike. Didn't dismount. Didn't cut his engine. Where's Grady? Who's asking? Iron vultures. The man's face changed. Not fear exactly, recognition. The kind of expression that crosses a person's face when a name they've heard in warnings suddenly shows up in person. Grady's not here. Then you won't mind us looking. A second man emerged from behind the equipment shed, bigger, carrying a pump-action shotgun openly. He racked the slide with a sound that cut through the engine noise like a blade. You need to leave, the second man said. Knox stared at him. Then he killed his engine. The silence was enormous. 7 other engines died in sequence, a cascade of falling thunder that left nothing but the wind and the creak of frozen branches and the distant ticking of hot metal cooling in Arctic air. Knox swung his leg over and stepped off his bike. His boots crunched in the snow. He stood in the headlight glow, tall, broad, leather-clad, his face expressionless, his eyes locked on the man with the shotgun. There's a woman in that cabin, Knox said. His voice carried no inflection, no threat, no plea, just the flat certainty of a man stating something he already knew to be true. Her name is Mara Mercer. She has a son. He's 6 years old. He's sitting in a garage 40 miles south of here waiting for her. The man with the shotgun didn't move. I don't know anything about any woman. That's the wrong answer. It's the only one you're getting. Knox took one step forward. The shotgun came up. The sentry at the tree line raised his weapon. The younger man near the cabin door put his hand on his pistol. Behind Knox, the iron vultures dismounted. Boots hit snow in a synchronized percussion. 8 men spread into a line, shoulder to shoulder, leather and denim and cold-hardened faces. Nobody carrying a visible weapon. Nobody speaking. Nobody breaking eye contact with the armed men surrounding them. The standoff lasted 4 seconds. Then a voice came from inside the cabin. Calm, measured. The voice of a man who is used to controlling rooms without raising his volume. Let them in. The shotgun lowered. The sentry stepped back. The younger man moved aside from the doorway. Knox walked toward the cabin. Harlan grabbed his arm. Knox. I'm going in. Not alone. Alone. Harlan's grip tightened. Their eyes met. The same argument from the roadside played out again in 3 seconds of silence. Harlan's caution against Knox's certainty, the old man's fear of what Knox might become against Knox's terror of what he'd be if he didn't. Knox pulled his arm free. He walked through the cabin door. The inside was one large room heated by a wood-burning stove that radiated a wall of dry heat. The floor was bare plywood. A folding table near the center held a laptop, a satellite phone, and 3 pistols arranged in a neat row. Empty beer cans lined the windowsill. The air smelled like wood smoke and tobacco, and the chemical sweetness of something Knox recognized from his military days, the sterile, wrong-smelling odor of narcotics packaged for transport. Two more men stood against the far wall, armed, watching. And in the center of the room, sitting in a metal folding chair with her wrists zip-tied to the armrests, was Mara Mercer. She was alive. That was the first thing Knox registered. Alive. Breathing. Her head was up, not hanging. Her eyes were open, dark, exhausted, terrified, but open. Her lip was split and swollen. A bruise covered the left side of her jaw from cheekbone to chin. Her waitress uniform from the Double Arrow Diner was torn at the shoulder, and her arms showed marks that Knox recognized instantly. Grip bruises. The kind that come from being held down, from being dragged. But she was alive, and she was looking at Knox with an expression he would carry for the rest of his life. The look of a person who had stopped believing anyone was coming and then heard motorcycle engines through the walls. A man sat in a recliner near the stove, late 50s, gray hair cropped short, a thin face with sharp cheekbones and pale eyes that reflected the firelight without warmth. He wore a flannel shirt unbuttoned over a white thermal, clean jeans, boots that had never touched a work site, a gold watch on his left wrist. In his right hand, a glass of whiskey that he raised slightly in Knox's direction, like a toast. Vincent Grady. He hadn't changed much, older, thinner, but the same cold patience in those pale eyes, the same way of sitting that made every room feel like a cage he'd built for someone else. "Knox Callahan," Grady said. He smiled, the kind of smile Eli had described, present but empty, a gesture performed by muscles with no connection to anything human behind them. "I heard you got boring." Knox didn't look at him. He was looking at Mara. "I'm here for her." Grady sipped his whiskey. "She owes me $32,000. Hospital bills, interest, late fees. I'm a businessman, Knox. You understand debt. Cut her loose. When the debt's paid, the debt's done." Grady laughed quietly. Not because it was funny, because laughing was another way of showing power. The luxury of amusement when everyone else was afraid. "You've changed," Grady said. "Used to be you worked for me and didn't ask questions. Used to be you understood how things worked in this county. People borrow, people pay. People who can't pay work it off." He gestured toward Mara with his whiskey glass. "She can work. I've offered her reasonable terms." Mara flinched at the word reasonable. Her hands clenched against the zip ties. Her eyes never left Knox. "You remember Tommy Sievert?" Knox said. Grady's smile faltered. Just a flicker. Just enough. "You sent me after him in 2014. I put him in the hospital for 3 months." Knox's voice stayed flat. "I think about Tommy every day. Every single day. I think about the sound his jaw made when it broke. I think about how he tried to crawl away and I followed him." He paused. "I think about how much I enjoyed it, and I think about the fact that I was doing your work when I did it." The room went very still. "So yeah, Grady, I understand debt." Knox took one step closer. "And I understand that I owe Tommy Sievert something I can never repay. But I can start by making sure you don't do to that woman what you did to every person in this county who was too broke and too scared to tell you no." Grady set his glass down on the armrest of the recliner, slowly, deliberately. His pale eyes had gone flat. "You brought bikers to my property," he said, "in a snowstorm, uninvited, to lecture me about morality." He leaned forward. "You think riding with a patch makes you different from me? You're the same thing I am. You always were. You just got sentimental." Knox heard it then. A sound from outside, subtle, almost buried under the wind, boots in snow, moving fast, coming from the east side of the compound. Brooks. Knox needed 30 more seconds. "You're right," he said to Grady. "I was the same thing. I broke people for you. I collected debts I knew would never be paid. I watched people beg and didn't stop." He looked at Mara, then back at Grady. "But there's a boy sitting in a garage right now who walked 2 miles through a blizzard to find help for his mother. He's 6 years old. He blames himself for every tear she's ever cried. And I'm not leaving this cabin without her." Grady studied him for a long, dangerous moment. The fire crackled in the stove. Snow hissed against the windows. The two armed men against the wall shifted their weight, reading their boss's face for a signal. Then Grady reached for one of the pistols on the table. His fingers touched the grip. The back wall of the cabin exploded inward. Sheriff Brooks came through the storage room door with her shotgun raised, her deputy 2 steps behind with his sidearm drawn and his hands shaking badly enough that Knox could see the barrel trembling from across the room. "Nobody move!" Brooks shouted. "Sheriff's department! Hands where I can see them." The 2 armed men froze. Grady's hand stopped on the pistol grip. His pale eyes moved from Knox to Brooks to the deputy and calculated something cold and mathematical behind that empty smile. Then the cabin door behind Knox burst open and Harlan filled the frame with Slade and Rooster, flanking him, 3 abreast, blocking the exit with their bodies. Grady looked at the pistol under his fingers, then at the shotgun pointed at his chest, then at the wall of bikers behind Knox. His smile didn't fade. It just emptied even further, until it was nothing but teeth and anatomy. "You're making a mistake," he said to Knox. Knox stepped forward, grabbed the zip ties on Mara's wrists, and snapped them with a single sharp pull. She gasped, not from pain, but from the sudden freedom, the sudden reality of hands that could move, arms that could reach, a body that was no longer pinned. She looked up at him with eyes full of tears she'd been refusing to shed for hours. "Eli," she whispered. "Where's Eli?" "Safe. He's safe." Mara's face crumbled, not slowly, all at once, like a dam failing. She covered her mouth with both freed hands and sobbed, one raw, guttural sound that echoed through the cabin and made every man in the room either look away or wish they could. Knox put his hand on her shoulder, carefully, the way you touch something that might shatter. "We're taking you home." Outside, boots crunched in snow as Brooks' voice barked commands. The sound of handcuffs clicking, radio traffic, men being pulled from the tree line and pushed against the cabin wall. But Knox's eyes were on Grady. The older man sat in his recliner, hands raised to shoulder height, pale eyes fixed on Knox with something that wasn't fear and wasn't anger. It was patience, the long, cold patience of a man who had survived worse than this and intended to survive this too. "You think this ends here?" Grady said quietly, calm, almost amused. "I've got lawyers you can't spell. I've got judges who owe me favors. I've got people in places you don't even know exist." His eyes moved to Mara. "She signed papers, Knox. Contracts. Witnessed and notarized. Everything I did was on paper. Everything she owes is documented. Your little rescue mission just gave me a harassment case against the sheriff's department and a civil suit against your club." Knox felt the words land, felt the truth in them, which was worse than the threat. Because Grady wasn't bluffing. Men like Grady never bluffed. They built systems designed to survive exactly this, the moment when someone finally came for them. The paperwork was real. The lawyers were real. The judges were real. And Mara Mercer had signed things in moments of desperation that could be used to build a legal cage around her for years. Knox looked at Mara. She was trembling, not from cold anymore, from the realization that rescue was not the same as freedom, that getting out of the cabin was not the same as getting out of Grady's world. Grady smiled one last time as Brooks pulled him to his feet and cuffed him. "See you in court, Callahan." They let him out into the snow. Knox stood alone in the cabin for a moment, surrounded by the smell of smoke and narcotics and the faint copper trace of blood, and felt something he hadn't prepared for. Doubt. Not about finding Mara, not about the ride, not about the storm or the compound or the guns. Doubt about whether anything he'd done tonight actually mattered. Because Grady was right. The system he'd built wasn't in this cabin. It was in courtrooms and file cabinets and the signatures of desperate people who had no idea what they were agreeing to when the bills were drowning them, and the only hand reaching down belonged to a man who smiled without meaning it. Knox walked out of the cabin into the freezing dark. Mara sat in the back of Brooks' cruiser, wrapped in a blanket, shaking. The iron vultures stood in a loose perimeter around their bikes, engines off, breath rising in clouds. Grady was in the back of a second vehicle that had arrived from somewhere, a county transport unit, lights flashing, chains grinding through ice. Harlan appeared at Knox's side. "It's done." "No," Knox said. He watched Grady's pale face disappear behind tinted glass as the transport pulled away. It's not. He felt it in his chest, a certainty cold and heavy as the mountain itself. Grady's words were already working inside him like poison. And somewhere in the back of a sheriff's cruiser, a woman who had just been freed from zip ties was staring at her own bruised wrists and understanding what Knox was only beginning to see. The chains had been cut tonight, but the cage was still standing. The hospital smelled like bleach and failure. Knox stood in the hallway outside the emergency department at Blackstone County General with his back against a cinder block wall painted the color of nothing. That institutional beige that exists in every building where people go to receive news they don't want. Fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead, one of them flickering at a frequency that burrowed into his skull like a drill bit. His boots left wet prints on the linoleum. His leather jacket was soaked through. His hands still trembled. Not from cold anymore, but from the chemical crash that follows sustained adrenaline, the body's quiet admission that it cannot sustain war mode indefinitely. It was 2:47 a.m. Mara Mercer was behind a curtain somewhere down the corridor. Hypothermia. Dehydration. 3 cracked ribs on the left side. A split lip that needed 4 stitches. Contusions across her forearms and shoulders consistent with what the attending physician had carefully documented as trauma sustained through physical restraint by another party. The doctor, a tired woman in her 50s who looked like she'd seen this exact chart 1,000 times, had asked Mara if she wanted to speak with a victim's advocate. Mara said no. She said it the way people say no when they've been saying it to the wrong people for so long that the word has lost its power and become just another sound their mouth makes while their eyes do something different entirely. Knox heard the refusal through the curtain. He didn't intervene. Wasn't his place. Wasn't his right. But he stood in that hallway and pressed his shoulders against the cinder block and closed his eyes and breathed through the specific kind of rage that has no target, because the thing causing it isn't a person. It's a system, a pattern, a machine built from poverty and isolation, and the mathematical certainty that desperate people will always sign whatever is put in front of them. Harlan appeared at the end of the corridor, carrying 2 styrofoam cups of coffee from the vending machine near the lobby. The coffee was terrible. Knox knew it would be terrible because hospital vending machine coffee existed at the intersection of caffeine and punishment, and he drank it anyway because his body needed something warm that wasn't anger. Brooks is processing Grady at county lockup, Harlan said, leaning against the opposite wall. He'll be arraigned tomorrow, maybe the day after, depending on the storm. He'll make bail. Probably. Within hours. Probably. Knox stared at the flickering fluorescent tube. What did they find at the compound? Brooks isn't sharing details, but I talked to Rooster, who talked to the rookie deputy, who talks when he's nervous, which is always. Harlan sipped his coffee and grimaced. They found packaging materials in the trailer, scales, baggies, enough residue to charge distribution, plus a laptop they're sending to the state forensics lab. That's not enough. It's something. It's not enough because Grady planned for this. Knox's voice was quiet, controlled, the kind of controlled that Harlan recognized as more dangerous than shouting. He keeps the product off-site. He keeps the money offshore. He keeps the paper trail clean enough that every lawyer in the state will line up to represent him because the case is built on zip ties and a snowstorm and the testimony of a woman who signed loan documents voluntarily. Harlan said nothing for a moment. Then carefully, "You sound like you've thought about this. I've had 40 minutes. That's a lot of thinking for a man who just rode through a blizzard to rescue someone." Knox looked at him. "Say what you mean." Harlan held the coffee cup with both hands, his thick fingers wrapped around the rim, steam curling up past his weathered face. "I mean, you're doing the thing you do, the thing where you solve the problem in front of you and then immediately find the bigger problem behind it and convince yourself that the first solution was worthless because the second problem still exists. Because it does. And you're going to fix that one too?" Knox didn't answer. "And the one behind that? And the one behind that?" Harlan's voice stayed level, but his eyes had sharpened in a way that Knox associated with the moments before the older man said something nobody wanted to hear. "At what point do you stop, Knox? At what point does the rescue end and the crusade begin? Because I followed you down both roads and one of them ends better than the other." Knox pushed off the wall and walked to the window at the end of the corridor. The parking lot below was buried in snow. A single ambulance sat under the portico, its lights off, its windshield iced over. Beyond the lot, the town of Blackstone lay in frozen darkness. Scattered streetlights, a few windows glowing, the rest swallowed by the storm. His phone buzzed. A text from Deacon. Kid's asleep. Hasn't let go of the backpack. Rio's reading him something from a motorcycle manual because we don't have children's books. He seems okay. He's not okay. Knox read the message twice. He stared at the last 3 words until they burned into his vision like after images. He's not okay. He put the phone away. A door opened down the corridor. Sheriff Brooks stepped out of the room where Mara was being treated, pulling the door closed behind her with the careful deliberation of someone who wanted the sound to be as small as possible. She saw Knox and walked toward him. Her tactical vest was gone. Her uniform shirt was untucked on one side. She looked like she'd aged 3 years and 4 hours. She's stable, Brooks said. Physically. The rest, she trailed off, which was unlike her. Brooks didn't trail off. Brooks finished sentences the way she finished cases. Completely and on her terms. What did she tell you? Brooks studied him. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded document, a photocopy, wrinkled and water-stained, the ink smeared at the edges. She gave me this. Knox took it, unfolded it. It was a contract, a lending agreement between Mara Mercer and an entity called Ridgeline Financial Solutions, LLC, dated 14 months ago. The terms were dense and printed in font small enough to require a magnifying glass. Knox scanned the numbers. Principal amount of $8,000, interest rate of 47%, compounding monthly, a penalty structure that doubled the owed amount for every missed payment. At the bottom, Mara's signature. Small, careful, the handwriting of a woman who knew she was signing something dangerous, but had a son in a hospital bed and no one else offering to help. Ridgeline Financial Solutions, Knox said, shell company, registered to a P.O. box in Carver City. No physical office, no employees on file, one listed officer. Brooks paused. A man named Dale Sweeney. The name hit Knox like a brick through glass. He didn't move, didn't blink. But something in his face must have changed because Brooks tilted her head and studied him with the focused attention of a woman who had spent 20 years reading the faces of people who were trying not to react. You know him, she said. Not a question. Knox's throat constricted. He folded the contract back along its creases with hands that had gone very still. Dale Sweeney, he said, and the name came out like something he was pulling from a drain, was a prospect for the Iron Vultures, 2012 to 2013. Brooks went rigid. He prospected for 11 months, did runs, cleaned the garage, showed up every Friday, hung around the edges of everything and learned how we operated. Knox's jaw tightened to the point where the muscles along his temple visibly corded. Bull patched him in at the end of 2013, full member, road name, ledger, because he was good with numbers. Was. We caught him skimming from the club treasury 6 months after he patched. Small amounts at first, then larger. Harlan found the discrepancy. We voted him out, stripped his patch, told him to disappear. And? He disappeared. Into Grady's operation. Knox looked at Brooks and the pieces clicked together behind his eyes in a configuration that made his stomach turn. Sweeney was our guy. He knew our routes, our contacts, our chapter house, our members' names. He knew who had records, who had warrants, who had families. He took all of that to Grady. Brooks exhaled slowly. So Grady's financial arm, this Ridgeline company, is being run by a man who used to be an Iron Vulture. Yeah. A man your club trained, your club trusted, your club gave access to everything. Yeah. The word sat between them like a confession. Brooks took the contract back and looked at it again. Her expression had changed. Not harder exactly, but more complex. The look of a law enforcement officer who has just realized that the clean line between the rescue team and the problem is not as clean as she needed it to be. Knox, I need to ask you something, and I need the truth. Ask. When your club expelled Sweeney in 2013, what exactly did you do to him? Knox's eyes went flat. We took his patch, told him he was out. 2 members escorted him off the property. That's it? That's it. Nobody touched him? Nobody threatened him? Nobody gave him a reason to come back with a grudge and a new employer? Knox didn't answer immediately. His silence lasted 3 seconds too long, and Brooks caught it. Knox. Bull wanted to handle it the old way. I talked him out of it. What's the old way? The way things got handled before I became road captain. Brooks closed her eyes, opened them. So you're telling me there's a man out there who was humiliated and expelled from your club, who then joined forces with the most dangerous criminal operator in the county, who used his knowledge of your organization to build a financial predation network, and who targeted a woman and child in a town where your club operates. And you want me to believe that's a coincidence? The corridor went very quiet. Knox felt the floor shift beneath him. Not literally, but the ground he'd been standing on since he found Eli on that highway. The moral ground, the solid earth of a man doing the right thing for the right reasons, suddenly felt less solid. You think Sweeney targeted Mara because of us, Knox said. I think I don't believe in coincidences. And I think a man who is thrown out of a brotherhood doesn't forget the brotherhood. He either misses it or he wants to destroy it. And the best way to destroy it, Brooks let the sentence hang. Knox finished it, is to make it destroy itself. The thought detonated silently in his chest. If Sweeney was behind Ridgeline, if Sweeney had deliberately targeted families in the Iron Vulture's territory, the exact neighborhoods where the club operated, the exact people the club had begun quietly protecting, then this wasn't a random act of predatory lending. This was a trap, a system designed to generate victims in the Iron Vulture's backyard, knowing eventually those victims would reach the club, knowing the club would respond, knowing the response would create legal exposure and criminal liability, and a trail of confrontations that could be weaponized in court. Grady's words from the cabin echoed in Knox's skull. She signed papers, contracts, witnessed and notarized. Everything I did was on paper, documented, deliberate, designed. Knox leaned against the wall and pressed both palms flat against the cinder block and stared at the floor. His reflection swam in the wet linoleum, a dark, distorted shape that looked like a man drowning upright. How many? He asked. How many what? How many families? How many people has Ridgeline loaned money to in Blackstone County? Brooks hesitated. That's part of an active investigation. How many, Lena? She looked at him for a long time. Then, at least 47 that we know of. Probably more. The state attorney general's office has been looking at Ridgeline for 8 months. They move slow. 47 families. 47 versions of Mara Mercer. 47 kitchen tables smashed in apartments that smelled like desperation and cleaning products. 47 sets of bills printed in red ink and contracts signed in small handwriting by people who knew they were drowning and grabbed the only hand reaching down. And behind every one of them, a man who used to wear the Iron Vulture's patch. Knox pushed off the wall and walked toward the exit. Where are you going? Brooks called after him. To talk to Harlan. Knox, don't do anything. But he was already through the double doors and into the frozen parking lot, his boots punching through crusted snow, his breath coming in sharp white bursts that the wind shredded before they traveled 2 feet. The cold hit his wet jacket and turned it into a sheet of ice against his body, and he didn't care because the cold was the only thing keeping his thoughts from catching fire. Harlan was sitting in the cab of his pickup truck in the far corner of the parking lot, engine running, heat on, cigarette smoke leaking from a cracked window. Knox pulled open the passenger door and climbed in. The truck smelled like tobacco and old leather seats and the industrial hand cleaner Harlan kept in a jug behind the driver's seat. Ridgeline Financial Solutions, Knox said. Harlan's cigarette stopped halfway to his mouth. Dale Sweeney, Ledger. He's running Grady's lending operation. He's the one who gave Mara the loan. Brooks says he's got at least 47 families in the county on his books. Harlan set the cigarette in the ashtray very slowly. His hands were steady, but his face had gone the color of cold ash. Sweeney, he said. Yeah. The kid we patched in 2013. Yeah. The kid who sat in my garage every Friday for a year learning how our books worked. Yeah. Harlan stared through the windshield at the snow-covered parking lot. His jaw moved like he was grinding his teeth down to powder. "I vouched for him," Harlan said. "At the patch-in vote. I stood up and told the club he was solid. I said he had good hands and a clean record and he'd be an asset." He paused. "I taught him how to read a ledger, how to track cash flow, how to structure a loan." The last word hung in the truck cab like smoke. "You didn't know," Knox said. "I should have." "Nobody knew." "I'm the treasurer, Knox. I'm supposed to know numbers the way you know roads. I brought a predator into our house and handed him the keys to our safe." Harlan picked up the cigarette and took a drag that hollowed his cheeks. "And now he's using everything I taught him to bleed this county dry." Knox watched the older man's face and saw something he'd never seen there before. Not anger, not frustration, but genuine shame. The kind that doesn't come from making a mistake. The kind that comes from realizing your mistake became someone else's suffering. "There's more," Knox said. Harlan looked at him. "Brooks thinks Sweeney is targeting our territory deliberately, setting traps, creating victims in neighborhoods where the club operates, knowing we'll respond, knowing the response creates legal exposure." Knox's voice was steady, but his hands were clenched on his knees. "This isn't just predatory lending. It's an operation designed to bring us down." Harlan's cigarette burned to the filter. He didn't notice. The orange ember glowed an inch from his fingers, and he didn't flinch. "A revenge play," Harlan said. "Yeah." "Using the people we're supposed to be protecting." "Yeah." "As bait." The word dropped through the conversation like a stone through ice. Harlan crushed the cigarette in the ashtray and sat in silence for what felt like minutes. Outside, the snow had eased slightly. Still falling, but lighter now, the storm breathing between fits of fury. "Does Mara know?" Harlan asked. "I don't think she knows any of it. She borrowed money because her son was sick. She signed what they put in front of her. She's not a target because of who she is. She's a target because of where she lives. In our territory." "In our territory." Harlan's hands gripped the steering wheel. His knuckles went white. "We have to tell the others." "I know." Slade, Rooster, Whitley. They all have families in these neighborhoods. If Sweeney's operation has touched 47 people, Harlan trailed off, doing math in his head. "Knox. Some of those could be people we know. People whose kids go to the same schools, people who work at the diner, the gas station, the hardware store." Knox said nothing because Harlan was right, and the rightness of it was expanding inside his chest like a balloon inflated past its limits. "And if we confront Sweeney directly," Harlan continued, "we're doing exactly what he wants. We're proving his case. Outlaw motorcycle club intimidates local business operator. That's the headline he's been building toward." "So we do nothing?" "I didn't say that." "Then what?" Harlan turned and looked at him. The old man's eyes were bright with something that Knox recognized because he'd seen it in his own reflection at 3 o'clock in the morning when the walls of his apartment closed in and the silence became loud enough to drown out thought. Fear. Not of Grady. Not of Sweeney. Not of armed men or mountain compounds or shotguns in the dark. Fear of irrelevance. Of impotence. Of being the kind of man who rides through a blizzard to rescue someone and then discovers that the rescue was exactly what the enemy wanted. Knox's phone buzzed again. Deacon. "Knox." The boy woke up. "He's asking for you. He keeps saying the same thing over and over." "He's coming back. He's coming back." "I asked who." "He won't say." "He's shaking." Knox stared at the screen. Something cold and precise moved through his bloodstream. He called Deacon. "Put him on." Shuffling. The sound of the garage, distant engines, the creak of a metal door, Rio's voice murmuring something in the background. Then a small voice, tight with fear. "Mr. Knox?" "I'm here, Eli." "Is my mom okay?" "She's at the hospital. She's safe. She's going to be fine." Silence. The kind of silence a child makes when he's deciding whether to tell the truth about something that scares him. Eli. "Deacon says you're upset. He says you keep saying someone's coming back." More silence. Eli. "Who's coming back?" The boy's voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible over the phone speaker. Knox pressed the device against his ear and closed his eyes and listened. The nice man. The one who came before Grady. Knox's blood stopped moving. What nice man? He came to our apartment a long time ago, before the yelling started. He wore a leather jacket like yours. He had a picture on the back, a bird, like your bird. Knox's vision tunneled. He talked to my mom for a long time. He was smiling. He brought her papers. He said he could help with the hospital money. Mom said he seemed nice. Eli paused. Then later the other men started coming, the mean ones, and Grady. Knox couldn't speak. Mr. Knox, the nice man. He's going to come back, isn't he? He's going to find us. Knox opened his eyes. Harlan was watching him. The old man had heard enough through the phone's tiny speaker to understand. His face looked like a man watching his own house burn down from across a field. Eli, listen to me. Nobody is coming for you. Nobody is going to find you. Deacon is right there. Rio is right there. You're safe. But the nice man isn't coming back. I promise. He hung up. The truck cab was silent except for the heater rattling and the wind throwing snow against the glass. Sweeney went to her apartment, Knox said. His voice had changed. Dropped into a register that Harlan had only heard once before, the night Knox came back from the Eastgate parking lot with blood on his hands and that dead-nothing expression, and told the club he was done being what they used to be. He went there personally, wearing his old cut, using our patch to make her trust him. Harlan's hand slid off the steering wheel. He used the iron vultures to get through her door. He showed up looking like us, talking like us. And she let him in because she thought he was safe. Knox's jaw locked. He used the one thing this club has been trying to rebuild, trust, and he weaponized it. He turned us into the bait and the trap at the same time. Harlan looked physically ill. His face had gone from ash to something closer to gray-green, the complexion of a man processing nausea at the cellular level. That's why Eli walked toward the garage, Knox said. He recognized the patch. He saw bikers and he associated them with the man who first came to help his mother. The nice man with the bird on his jacket. He paused. Sweeney didn't just trap Mara. He conditioned her son to trust the image, to seek it out, so that when things got bad enough, the boy would run toward the very people Sweeney wanted involved. The scope of it opened in Knox's mind like a chasm. Every step of this, every piece, had been architected. The loan, the escalation, the violence, the breaking point. Even Eli's desperate walk through the blizzard. All of it channeling toward a single outcome. The iron vultures riding into Grady's compound, creating exactly the confrontation that Sweeney could use to dismantle the club legally, publicly, permanently. Knox got out of the truck. The cold hit him and he didn't feel it. He walked to the center of the parking lot and stood in the falling snow and looked up at the sky, and for the first time since he was 8 years old, he felt completely, devastatingly powerless. Because this wasn't a fight he could win with fists or engines or leather or numbers. This was a war fought with documents and shell companies and the signatures of people who couldn't afford to say no. And the man fighting it knew every weakness the iron vultures had, because he'd been one of them. His phone buzzed a third time. Unknown number. Knox answered, silence on the line, then a voice he hadn't heard in 10 years. Calm, precise, almost friendly. The voice of a man who counts money the way other people count breaths. Hey, Knox, it's Dale. Knox's hand tightened on the phone until the case creaked. I hear you found my client tonight, Mara. Nice woman, terrible with money, but nice. A pause. I also hear you and the boys rode into Grady's compound like it was 2008 all over again. Very dramatic, very you. Knox said nothing. Here's the thing, brother, and I call you brother because I earned that patch the same as you did, even if you took it back. You just made my year. Every second of what happened tonight is documented. Grady's security cameras, audio recordings, satellite phone logs, your boys rolling up to a private property, no warrant, no invitation, intimidating armed residents. Sweeney's voice carried the specific warmth of a man who has been waiting a very long time for a phone call he gets to enjoy. By Monday morning, every patched member of the Iron Vulture's Blackstone chapter will be named in a civil complaint. By Wednesday, the county DA will have a criminal referral on his desk. By Friday, your club charter will be under review by the national board. Knox's vision went red at the edges. And Mara? She'll be subpoenaed as a witness for both sides, which means everything she says about Grady also becomes everything she says about the men who broke into a private compound and escalated a civil debt dispute into an armed confrontation. Sweeney paused. You didn't rescue her, Knox. You made her the centerpiece of a case that destroys everything you care about. Knox heard his own breathing, loud, ragged, the breathing of a man standing on the edge of something that has no bottom. Why? Knox asked. One word, all he had. Sweeney laughed softly. You took my patch. You took my brothers. You took the only family I ever had and threw me out like I was nothing. You think I was going to just disappear? I spent 10 years building this, Knox. 10 years. Learning from Grady, building Ridgeline, finding every weak point in your little redemption story. And the beautiful thing is, his voice dropped to a whisper. You did exactly what I needed you to do, every single step. You're predictable, brother. You always were. The line went dead. Knox stood in the parking lot holding the phone against his ear, listening to dead air, snow collecting on his shoulders and in his hair and on the cracked leather of his jacket. Harlan was beside him. He'd gotten out of the truck at some point. Knox didn't know when. Knox. He's been building this for 10 years. Knox. He used us. He used Mara. He used the boy. Every piece was designed to make us do exactly what we did. Knox, look at me. Knox turned. Harlan's face was close. The old man's eyes were steady despite everything. Steady the way old timber is steady. The kind of strength that comes from having weathered things that would have broken younger wood. What do we do? Harlan asked. Knox looked past him toward the hospital. Somewhere inside those walls, Mara Mercer was lying in a bed with cracked ribs and a split lip, and the knowledge that the man who first offered her help had been wearing the same patch as the man who just freed her. Somewhere 40 miles south, a 6-year-old boy was shaking in a garage, afraid of a nice man with a bird on his jacket coming back. And somewhere in the dark, Dale Sweeney was sitting with 10 years of patience and a legal arsenal built from the desperation of 47 families, waiting for Monday morning. Knox looked at Harlan. We stop being what he expects us to be. Meaning what? Meaning we don't fight this with bikes and fists and leather. That's what he planned for. That's the version of us he wants. Knox's voice was quiet now, but the trembling had stopped. Something had settled in him. Not calm exactly, but clarity. The cold, hard clarity of a man who has just watched his enemy's entire strategy reveal itself and realized the only way to survive it is to become someone he's never been. We fight this with the thing he never thought we had. Which is? Knox pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in 3 years. A number belonging to a woman in the state attorney general's office who had once offered the Iron Vultures something Knox had refused on principle: cooperation. The truth, Knox said, every piece of it. Everything we did, everything we were, everything Sweeney knows about us because we gave it to him. He looked at Harlan. We opened the books. All of them. Every record, every ride, every dirty thing this club ever did before we cleaned house. We hand it to Brooks. We hand it to the AG. We give them everything Sweeney has and more, so that when he tries to use it against us, there's nothing left to leverage. Harlan's face went white. You're talking about destroying the club. I'm talking about saving it. By giving the law everything they'd need to shut us down? By taking away the weapons Sweeney built. If we disclose everything voluntarily, full cooperation, full transparency, it changes the legal landscape. We're not a criminal organization covering its tracks. We're witnesses. Cooperating witnesses with first-hand knowledge of Grady's operation and Sweeney's network. And if the AG decides to prosecute us instead, Knox held his gaze. Then we deserve it. The snow fell between them. The hospital lights hummed. Somewhere inside, a machine beeped in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. Harlan looked at Knox for a very long time. Then he looked at the hospital. Then at the parking lot full of motorcycles belonging to men who had risked their lives tonight based on the trust they placed in the man standing in front of him. The brothers will never agree to this. Some won't. Some will leave. I know. Some might turn on you. I know. Harlan's voice dropped. You're asking these men to strip themselves bare, to hand over the only protection they have, their silence, to people who've spent decades trying to put them in cages. Knox thought about Eli, about the boy's small hand gripping his wrist on a frozen highway, about the question that started everything: how do I make my mom stop crying? Sweeney built a weapon out of our secrets, Knox said. The only way to disarm it is to make them not secret anymore. And yeah, it might destroy us. It might end the Iron Vultures. It might put some of us in front of a grand jury. He paused. But if we don't do it, Sweeney buries Mara in court. He buries the club in litigation. He keeps bleeding this county with his loans and his shell companies and his 47 families who signed their lives away because a man in our patch told them it was safe. Knox lifted the phone to his ear. It was ringing. On the third ring, a woman's voice answered. Alert despite the hour. Professional despite being woken at 3 in the morning. This is Assistant Attorney General Catherine Hale. Ms. Hale, this is Knox Callahan, Iron Vultures MC, Blackstone County. A pause. Mr. Callahan, it's been a while. I need to meet with you, tomorrow, in person. Regarding? Knox closed his eyes. The snow was lighter now. The storm was finally breaking. Somewhere beyond the clouds, a frozen dawn was building along the mountain ridgeline, pale and indifferent, and coming whether anyone was ready for it or not. Regarding everything, Knox said, I'm opening the books. The line was silent for 4 heartbeats. Then Hale said, I'll be in Blackstone by noon. Knox hung up. Harlan stared at him with an expression that contained grief and admiration and terror in equal measure. The face of a man watching his brother walk willingly into a fire that will either purify or consume him. There's no coming back from this, Harlan said. Knox slid the phone into his jacket pocket and turned toward the hospital entrance. Toward Mara. Toward the conversation he needed to have with her before dawn. The one where he told her the truth about the nice man with the bird on his jacket. The one where he explained that the people who rescued her were also the people who created the monster that nearly destroyed her. There was never supposed to be, Knox said. He walked through the automatic doors and disappeared into the fluorescent light, leaving Harlan alone in the parking lot with the snow and the silence and the terrible, clarifying weight of what was about to happen to every single one of them. Knox didn't sleep. He sat in the plastic chair beside Mara Mercer's hospital bed for 3 hours, watching the heart monitor trace green lines across a black screen and listening to the building breathe. The hiss of heating vents, the distant squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum, the occasional murmur of a nurse passing in the corridor outside. The fluorescent light above Mara's bed had been dimmed to its lowest setting, casting the room in a sickly amber wash that made everything look bruised. Mara slept in fragments, 10 minutes at a time. Then her eyes would snap open and sweep the room with the sharp, animal alertness of someone who'd trained herself to catalog every exit, every shadow, every sound that didn't belong. Each time she woke, her gaze found Knox first. Each time she seemed surprised he was still there. Each time, something in her face softened for half a second before the armor came back and she closed her eyes again. At 5:14 a.m., she woke and didn't close her eyes. "You're still here," she said. Her voice was raw, scraped thin by exhaustion and the breathing tube they'd removed 2 hours ago. "Yeah. Why?" Knox looked at her. The bruise along her jaw had deepened overnight to a purple black that spread toward her ear. The stitches in her lip pulled her mouth into an asymmetry that made her look like she was permanently considering something she didn't want to say. Her eyes, dark brown, large, rimmed with the kind of exhaustion that lives in the bone, watched him with an intelligence that cut through the medical haze like headlights through fog. "Because I need to tell you something," Knox said, "and you're not going to want to hear it." Mara pushed herself upright against the pillows. She winced, ribs, but didn't make a sound, a woman accustomed to hiding pain. "The man who came to your apartment," Knox said, "the one who brought you the loan paperwork, the one with the leather jacket and the bird patch." Mara's face changed, not dramatically, just a tightening around the eyes, a stillness in the jaw, the micro-expression of someone bracing for impact. His name is Dale Sweeney. He used to be a member of our club, the Iron Vultures. He was patched in 11 years ago and expelled 6 months later for stealing from us. Knox kept his voice level, surgical, because the information deserved precision, even if it was going to destroy something. After we threw him out, he went to work for Grady. He built a lending company called Ridgeline Financial Solutions. He used it to target families in our territory, families like yours, and he used our patch to get through your door. Mara stared at him. He showed up looking like one of us because he knew you'd trust it. He knew the patch meant something in this neighborhood. He knew that people around here associate the Iron Vultures with... Knox stopped, searched for a word that didn't sound like self-congratulation, and couldn't find one. With safety. Mara's hand moved to the blanket edge and gripped it. Her knuckles went white. "You're telling me," she said slowly, each word placed with the careful deliberation of someone diffusing an explosive, "that the man who trapped me in that loan, the man who sent Grady's people to my apartment, who got my kitchen table broken, who put me in zip ties in a cabin on a mountain, was one of you. Was. Not anymore. But he learned from you. Yes. He used your name, your symbol, your reputation. Yes. And now you're sitting in my hospital room telling me this at 5 in the morning because... What? Because you feel guilty? Because you want absolution?" Knox absorbed the words. They landed where they were aimed. "Because you deserve the truth before the rest of this happens. And because in about 6 hours, a woman from the State Attorney General's office is going to arrive in Blackstone, and I'm going to hand her everything, every record, every file, every piece of the club's history that Sweeney could use against you in court." He paused. "I'm dismantling our own protection to take away his leverage, and I need you to understand why." Mara's eyes glistened. Not tears, something harder, the wet gleam of rage compressed into a space too small to contain it. "My son walked 2 miles in a blizzard," she said. "He walked to your garage because he trusted the patch, because he'd seen it before. On the man who smiled at me and told me everything would be okay." Her voice cracked on the last word and she pressed her lips together until the stitches pulled. "Eli trusted you because Sweeney taught him to." Knox had no answer for that, because she was right, and being right didn't make it easier. It made it the kind of truth that sits in your chest like shrapnel, too deep to remove, too sharp to ignore, too embedded in everything around it to extract without causing more damage than leaving it in place. "I'm sorry," Knox said. 2 words. Inadequate. He knew it. She knew it. The heart monitor knew it, tracing its indifferent green line through the silence. Mara looked at the ceiling. "Get my son. Bring him here. I want to see him before whatever happens next." Knox stood. "I'll have Deacon bring him." "No." She looked at him. "You bring him. You made him a promise. Keep it." He nodded once and walked out. The dawn was gray and thin and offered nothing. Knox rode south through the remnants of the storm. The roads were clearing, plows had begun their work before sunrise, and the world had that post-blizzard look of exhausted surrender, everything buried and muffled and waiting. He made the garage in 40 minutes. The parking lot held 6 Iron Vultures bikes, snow-covered, plus Deacon's truck and Rio's beat-up Civic. Inside the garage was warm and smelled like motor oil and instant coffee, and the faint sweetness of hot chocolate that had been reheated too many times. Rio was asleep on a bench seat pulled from a junked van, his boots still on, one arm draped over his face. Deacon sat at the workbench cleaning medical instruments under a fluorescent lamp, his big hands moving with the precise, unhurried rhythm of a man performing a task he could do in total darkness. Eli was asleep on a cot near the repair bay. Someone, Rio probably, had built a fort of moving blankets around him, creating a small enclosed space that made the boy feel hidden, protected. The superhero backpack sat on the concrete floor beside the cot, its faded lightning bolts facing upward. Knox crouched beside the cot and touched the boy's shoulder. Eli's eyes opened instantly. No groggy transition, no slow waking, just closed to open, like a switch. The eyes of a child who'd learned to surface fast because the world didn't wait for you to catch up. "Hey." Hey, Eli whispered. Is my mom okay? She's awake. She's asking for you. I'm taking you to her. Eli sat up. He reached for his backpack with the automatic urgency of someone grabbing a lifeline and pulled it against his chest. Then he looked at Knox with those two old eyes and asked a question that drilled through every layer of armor Knox had left. Is the nice man going to be there? Knox's jaw tightened. No. The nice man is never going to be near you or your mom again. How do you know? Because I know. Eli studied him the way children study adults when they're deciding whether to invest the enormous, irreplaceable resource of trust in someone who might waste it. It took 3 seconds. Then he reached out and took Knox's hand. They drove to the hospital in Harlan's truck. Eli sat in the passenger seat with his backpack on his lap and his seatbelt pulled tight across his chest and his eyes fixed on the road ahead like he was memorizing every turn in case he needed to make the trip alone someday. Knox glanced at him twice. Both times the boy was watching the road with that fierce, exhausted concentration, and both times Knox had to grip the steering wheel harder to keep his hands from shaking. They arrived at 7:20 a.m. Eli walked through the hospital corridor holding Knox's hand, and when they reached Mara's room, the boy released his grip and ran. Mara caught him. She caught him the way drowning people catch ropes, with everything, with both arms and her broken ribs, and the full desperate strength of a body that had forgotten pain because something more powerful than pain was filling it. She pulled Eli onto the bed and held him against her chest, and made a sound that Knox would remember for the rest of his life. A low, guttural, animal noise that was neither crying nor laughing, but something older than both. The sound a mother makes when the thing she was certain she'd lost comes back. Knox stood in the doorway and watched. Then he stepped back into the corridor and let them have it. Whatever was happening in that room belonged to them, not to him, not to the club, not to anyone wearing a patch or carrying a weapon or building a legal strategy in a truck at 3 a.m. He leaned against the wall and closed his eyes and breathed. His phone rang. Harlan. She's here early. Who? Hale. The AG woman. She's at the garage. And Knox, she didn't come alone. She's got 2 investigators and a state police captain with her. Knox checked his watch, 7:35 a.m. She'd said noon. She'd arrived 5 hours early, which meant one of 2 things. Either the case was big enough to justify disrupting her entire schedule, or she already knew things about Grady and Sweeney that made waiting until noon feel like a liability. Where are the brothers? Most of them are here, Slade, Rooster, Whitley, Patch, Dominguez, some of the prospects. Harlan paused. Bull's here too. Knox's eyes opened. Bull showed up 20 minutes ago. He's not happy. How not happy? He threw a chair. Knox pushed off the wall. I'm on my way. Knox! Harlan's voice dropped. He knows about the call to Hale. He knows you're opening the books. And he's calling for a vote. A vote on what? On you. On your road captain patch. He says you acted without club authority, committed the chapter to a course of action without presidential approval, and endangered every member by inviting federal scrutiny. Knox stood in the hospital corridor while the words settled into their logical positions. A vote. On him. Called by a president who hadn't attended a club meeting in 4 months, who had abandoned the chapter to hide in a fishing cabin, who had left Knox to make every decision and carry every weight and absorb every consequence, and who was now reasserting authority at the exact moment those consequences arrived. I'll be there in 30 minutes, Knox said. Come faster. He hung up. Looked at Mara's door. Through the narrow window, he could see Eli curled against his mother's chest, both of them still. Both of them breathing in the synchronized rhythm of people who have found each other after being certain they wouldn't. Knox left the hospital without saying goodbye. The garage was chaos wrapped in silence. 15 iron vultures stood or sat in the main bay, arranged in the instinctive geometry of men who know how to occupy a space as a unit. Some leaned against bike lifts. Some sat on overturned crates. Some stood near the walls with their arms crossed and their faces locked in the neutral expression that bikers wear when they know something is about to break, and they haven't decided which side of the break they're on. Bull Langston stood at the center of the bay. He was 61, massive, not tall, 5'10", but built like a tree stump, with a barrel chest and forearms thick as fire hydrants, and a neck that seemed to start at his shoulders and end at his ears without bothering to taper. His beard was full and iron gray. His eyes were small, set deep, and burned with the particular fury of a man who has been embarrassed by someone he trusted. Bull wore his president's patch like a uniform, which it was. He'd earned it 23 years ago in a vote that wasn't close, and he'd held it through 3 law enforcement investigations, 2 internal purges, and the complete restructuring of the club's identity from outlaw operation to something harder to define. He'd agreed to Knox's reforms. He'd allowed the changes. He'd stepped back and let Knox run things because Knox was better at running things, and Bull was honest enough to know it. But stepping back is not the same as stepping down. And Bull had never stepped down. Catherine Hale sat at the workbench near the far wall. Early 40s, black hair pulled back tight, a navy suit that looked expensive and deliberate beneath a practical overcoat. She held a leather portfolio on her lap and a pen in her right hand, and she watched the room with the calm, predatory attention of a woman who prosecuted criminal organizations for a living and knew exactly how they shattered. Beside her, 2 investigators, a man and a woman, both in plain clothes, both carrying the particular stillness of people who record everything. Behind them, a state police captain in uniform, arms crossed, badge catching fluorescent light. Knox walked in through the side door. Every head turned. Bull saw him, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. There he is. Knox walked to the center of the bay. His boots left wet prints on the concrete. He stopped 8 feet from Bull, close enough to talk, far enough to read the room. Bull, you called the Attorney General. I did. Without a vote. Yes? Without talking to me. You were in your cabin. I was a phone call away. You've been a phone call away for 4 months. I've been here. The words landed hard. Several brothers shifted their weight. Rooster looked at the floor. Slade's jaw tightened. The room was dividing. Not visibly, not yet, but in the subtle molecular way that groups divide when the center doesn't hold, each person's body angling a few degrees toward the leader they trusted more. Bull stepped forward, close. His breath smelled like coffee and fury. You rode 8 men into an armed compound without my authorization. You engaged with a criminal operation that has legal infrastructure designed to destroy us, and then you called a state prosecutor and offered to hand over our books. His voice was controlled, but his hands were shaking. Every one of those decisions should have come through me. Every one. That's what the charter says. That's what the bylaws say. That's what the patch means. The patch means protect, Knox said. That's what I did. You protected one woman. I protected a child. And risked this entire club doing it. The shout echoed off the concrete walls and steel rafters and died in the sudden silence that followed. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed loud enough to hear. Knox looked at the brothers. At these men. Damaged, scarred, rebuilt men who had followed him through a blizzard 12 hours ago without hesitation. Men who had put their bodies between armed strangers and a woman they'd never met because Knox told them to. Men who were now watching him face the consequences of every decision they'd helped him make. Bull's right, Knox said. The room went still. Every decision I made last night should have gone through the president. That's the charter. I violated it. I acted alone. I committed the club. He paused. And I'd do it again, every piece of it. Because there's a 6-year-old boy in a hospital right now who is holding his mother for the first time in 2 days, and he's alive, and she's alive because we rode. Bull's face contorted. This isn't about the boy. It's always about the boy. Knox's voice cut through the room like a blade across glass. It's about the boy and the 46 other families that Dale Sweeney trapped using our name, our patch, our reputation. Sweeney walked into that woman's apartment wearing our colors, Bull. He used the iron vultures to make her trust him, and then he fed her to Grady. Silence. If we don't cooperate with Hale, if we don't open the books and show the AG everything, Sweeney buries us. He has 10 years of ammunition. He has contracts signed under our symbol. He has a legal strategy designed to frame every action we took last night as criminal intimidation by an outlaw motorcycle gang. Knox looked at Bull. He wins, and every family he trapped stays trapped. Bull's chest heaved, his fists clenched and unclenched at his sides. He looked around the room, at Harlan, at Slade, at the younger members watching from the edges, at Catherine Hale sitting at the workbench with her portfolio and her pen and her quiet, devastating patience. "If we open the books," Bull said, his voice low now, ground down to gravel, "they see everything. The old runs, the old deals, names, dates, things we buried when we cleaned house. I know. Some of those things have statutes of limitations that haven't expired. I know. Some of the men in this room could face charges. I know. Including me." Knox looked at him. The president of the Iron Vultures, a man who had spent 23 years building something out of wreckage and violence and the stubborn refusal to let broken men stay broken, standing in his own garage, facing the possibility that the thing he'd built was about to be dismantled by the very act of saving it. "Including you," Knox said, "including me, including anyone whose past is in those books." Bull turned away. He walked 3 steps toward the wall, stopped, pressed both palms flat against the cinder block, and stood there with his head down and his shoulders rigid. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the wind outside and the distant tick of a cooling engine. Catherine Hale stood. "Mr. Langston." Bull didn't turn around. "My office has been investigating Ridgeline Financial Solutions for 8 months. We have evidence that Dale Sweeney, operating through Grady's organization, has systematically targeted vulnerable families across 4 counties using predatory lending practices, document fraud, and coercion." She paused. "We also have evidence that he deliberately structured his operation to implicate the Iron Vultures, using your former association to create a legal framework that would collapse your club if you ever intervened." Bull's hands pressed harder against the wall. "Mr. Callahan's offer of cooperation gives my office something we didn't have before. Inside testimony. First-person accounts of Sweeney's time in your organization, his methods, his access, his knowledge. Combined with the financial records we've already obtained, it builds a case against Sweeney and Grady that doesn't rely on the testimony of their victims alone." Hale's voice was measured, professional, and carried the weight of someone who had delivered this speech to broken organizations before. "In exchange for full cooperation, my office is prepared to offer use immunity to participating members. That means your testimony cannot be used to prosecute you for past activities disclosed during the cooperation." Bull turned slowly. "Use immunity," he said. "Not transactional immunity." "Correct. Your past actions remain prosecutable through independent evidence, but nothing you tell us can be turned against you. So if they already have evidence on me from somewhere else, that's a separate matter." Bull laughed, a short, harsh, ugly sound. "So you want us to strip naked and hope nobody's already got a camera pointed at us?" "I want you to make a choice," Hale said. "Cooperate and give us the tools to dismantle Sweeney's operation, or don't, and watch him use your own history to destroy your club and leave 47 families buried in debt they can never repay." The room balanced on a knife's edge. Knox watched Bull, watched the war happening behind those deep-set eyes. Pride against necessity, secrecy against survival, the old way against the only way left. Then Harlan stepped forward. "I'll go first." Every eye in the room turned. Harlan stood in the center of the bay with his silver ponytail and his bad leg and his hands that had built and repaired and counted and maintained this club's infrastructure for 3 decades. He looked at Bull, then at Hale. "I vouched for Sweeney. I taught him our books. I trained the man who's destroying us." His voice was steady, but his eyes were bright with something that looked like it hurt. "Whatever you need from me, records, testimony, whatever, I'll give it. Because I helped create this problem, and I'm not letting someone else clean it up." Silence. Then Slade stood up from his crate. "I'm in." Rooster uncrossed his arms. "Yeah, me too." One by one, like a chain breaking and reassembling in a different shape, the brothers spoke. Whitley, Patch, Dominguez, Jenks, the prospects near the wall, each voice adding itself to something that felt less like a vote and more like a confession, a collective admission that the only way forward was through the worst of what they'd been. Bull watched them. His face was unreadable. His fists were still at his sides. The president of a club watching his members choose a course of action he hadn't authorized, hadn't approved, and couldn't stop. Knox waited. Bull looked at him. The two men held each other's gaze across the oil-stained concrete, the president and the road captain, the old guard and the new. Two versions of the same club staring at each other across a divide that had been widening for years and was finally too wide to pretend didn't exist. "If I lose my patch over this," Bull said, "if I lose my freedom, if I spend my last years in a federal facility because you decided to play hero for a waitress and her kid." He stepped close enough that Knox could see the broken capillaries in his eyes, the tremor in his lower lip that the beard couldn't hide. "You better make damn sure it was worth it." "It was," Knox said. Bull held his gaze for 5 more seconds. Then he turned to Hale. "What do you need?" The next 3 hours were a controlled demolition. Hale set up in the back office of the garage, a small room with a metal desk, a filing cabinet, and a window that looked out onto the repair bay. One investigator ran a recording device. The other took notes on a laptop. The state police captain stood near the door, mostly watching, occasionally asking questions that were sharper than they sounded. The brothers went in one at a time. Harlan first. 90 minutes. He came out looking 10 years older, his face drained to the color of old plaster, his hand shaking until he lit a cigarette and held it between his fingers like an anchor. Slade next. 45 minutes. He said nothing when he came out. Just walked to his bike and sat on it without starting the engine, staring at the gas tank like it held answers. Rooster. Whitley. Patch. Each man walking into that back office carrying decades of silence and walking out carrying something lighter and heavier at the same time. The strange, disorienting vertigo of having said things out loud that were supposed to stay in the dark forever. Knox went last. He sat across from Hale at the metal desk and told her everything. The old runs. The enforcement work for Grady in 2013 and 2014. Tommy Sievert. The parking lot, the blood, the sound of a jaw breaking under his fist. The moment he stopped. The reasons he stopped. The restructuring, the cleanup. The years of trying to rebuild something from the wreckage of what they'd been. Hale listened without expression. Her pen moved steadily across the legal pad. Her eyes never left his face. When he finished, she asked one question. Why now? Knox thought about it. Not for long. The answer was simple and enormous and had a name. Because a 6-year-old boy asked me how to make his mom stop crying, and I realized the only honest answer was to stop being part of the reason she was crying. Hale wrote something on her pad. Then she closed her portfolio. We'll move on Sweeney within 48 hours. My office will coordinate with Sheriff Brooks on the local charges against Grady. The federal component, the lending fraud, the interstate conspiracy, the money laundering through Ridgeline, goes through our office directly. She paused. Your cooperation will be noted in every filing. It won't make you heroes, but it will make you witnesses instead of defendants. Knox nodded. One more thing, Hale said. She looked at him with eyes that were professional and human at the same time. The eyes of a woman who had prosecuted men like him and understood that categories like guilty and innocent were architecture, not geography. Sweeney will know you cooperated. By tonight, his contacts in the courthouse will tell him. I know. He'll move, destroy records, relocate assets, possibly flee. I know. He might also do something reckless. Knox looked at her. What kind of reckless? Hale didn't answer directly. She opened her portfolio again, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and slid it across the desk. It was a surveillance photograph, black and white, grainy, taken from a distance with a long lens. It showed Dale Sweeney standing outside a self-storage facility in Carver City, loading boxes into the back of a black SUV. The timestamp was 2 days ago. My investigators have been watching Sweeney for 3 weeks, Hale said. He's been moving materials out of 3 storage units in Carver City, financial records, hard drives, document files. We believe he's preparing to relocate the core of his operation. Where? We don't know yet, but our surveillance team lost him yesterday afternoon. The blizzard. She took the photograph back. If Sweeney runs before we can execute a warrant, we lose the documentary evidence. The testimony helps, but without the records, the original loan documents, the communication logs, the payment tracking, The case weakened significantly. Knox felt the math assembling in his head. Sweeney knew the raid happened. Sweeney had called him from an unknown number at 3 in the morning, gloating. Sweeney thought he was in control. But Sweeney didn't know about Hale. Didn't know about the cooperation. Didn't know the brothers had spent the morning disassembling their own silence and handing the pieces to a state prosecutor. There was a window, small, closing fast. "How long until you can get a warrant?" Knox asked. "For the storage units? I can have paper by tomorrow morning. For Sweeney himself, arrest warrant, assets freeze, 48 hours minimum. Judge Caro doesn't work weekends." "Tomorrow morning is too late." "I'm aware." "He'll be gone by tonight." "Probably." Knox stared at the surveillance photograph in Hale's portfolio. A man loading boxes into an SUV, 10 years of weaponized grudge packed into cardboard and hard drives and documents signed by desperate people in desperate kitchens. "If someone were to locate Sweeney," Knox said carefully, "and inform law enforcement of his whereabouts in real time, while he was in possession of the records." Hale looked at him for a very long time. If a private citizen happened to observe a person of interest and reported that observation to law enforcement through appropriate channels, she said, matching his careful tone exactly, that would be civic duty. Knox stood. "Knox!" Hale's voice stopped him at the door. "Observation, not confrontation. If you touch him, if you threaten him, if you so much as raise your voice within earshot, everything we built today collapses. Sweeney's lawyers will argue coercion, intimidation, and the testimony becomes tainted." "I understand." "Do you? Because 12 hours ago you rode 8 motorcycles through a man's fence." Knox looked at her. 12 hours ago I didn't have a choice. Now I do." He walked out of the back office into the main bay. The brothers were waiting, scattered around the garage in the exhausted, hollow-eyed configuration of men who have just confessed everything and are now standing in the rubble wondering what's left. Harlan sat on a toolbox smoking. Slade leaned against a bike lift. Rio, who had arrived an hour ago after being relieved at the hospital by the rookie deputy, paced near the door with the coiled energy of a young man who needed to hit something and was trying to find a version of that impulse that didn't end in handcuffs. Knox's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered, heavy breathing. Then Sweeney's voice, different now, not smooth, not controlled, the ragged, fast-talking cadence of a man whose timeline has just collapsed. "You talked to the AG." Knox said nothing. "My source at the courthouse just called me. Catherine Hale drove to Blackstone at 5 this morning with a full team. She's at your garage right now." Sweeney's breathing was audible, irregular, the sound of controlled panic losing its grip on the controlled part. "What did you tell her?" "Everything." Silence. "You're lying." "The books, the runs, the enforcement work, Tommy Sievert, your prospecting year, how you skimmed the treasury, how we expelled you, how you went to Grady." Knox's voice was flat, emotionless, a recitation of facts delivered with the cadence of a man reading coordinates. Every brother in this garage testified, on the record, under oath. The breathing on the other end accelerated. "You destroyed your own club." "We destroyed your leverage." More silence. Longer this time. Knox could hear sounds in the background, yeah. A car engine, road noise, the whisper of tires on wet pavement. Sweeney was driving. "You think this changes anything? I have copies, backups. Everything's digital. Everything's distributed. You can hand the AG your sad little confession, and it won't matter because I have 47 signed contracts and 12 years of financial records that prove—" "Where are you, Dale?" The question cut through Sweeney's monologue like a wire through clay. "What? Where are you right now?" Silence. "Because Hale's investigators lost you yesterday in the blizzard. But the storm's over now, Dale. Roads are clear. And I think you're in a car right now with boxes in the back seat, driving somewhere you think is safe." Knox paused. "But there's nowhere safe, not anymore, because you built your entire operation on the assumption that we'd protect our secrets more than we'd protect our people. And you were wrong." The line went dead. Knox looked at the phone, then at Harlan. "He's running." Where? I don't know, but he's got the records with him. In the car. Knox turned to Rio. You still have that scanner app? The one that picks up toll transponder signals? Rio's pacing stopped. Yeah, why? Sweeney drives a black Chevy Tahoe, registered to Ridgeline Financial Solutions. If he's heading out of the county, he'll hit the Route 7 toll plaza or the Interstate Exchange at Millbrook. Rio was already pulling out his phone. I can ping the automated toll database. It's technically public record, travel time estimates. If his transponder hits either sensor, it'll flag in the system. Do it. Rio's fingers moved across the screen with the speed of a generation raised on devices. Knox watched him work and felt the strange, disorienting sensation of depending on technology deployed by a 26-year-old former foster kid who could barely change his own oil but could navigate digital infrastructure with the fluency of a native speaker. 3 minutes passed. 4. Rio's phone chimed. Got him. Rio's eyes widened. Route 7 northbound. He passed the Ridgemont toll sensor 4 minutes ago, heading toward Carver City. The storage units, Knox said. He's going back for more. He looked at the brothers, at these men. Exhausted, exposed, stripped of every secret they'd spent decades accumulating. Men who had walked into a back office and handed a prosecutor the ammunition to destroy them, and who were now standing in a cold garage waiting to be told what came next. I need 2 bikes, Knox said. Observation only, no contact. We follow him to the storage facility, confirm his location, and call Brooks. She coordinates with Hale's team and state police. They make the arrest. We don't touch him. We don't speak to him. We watch. Harlan shook his head. Knox, if he sees Iron Vulture's bikes, he won't. We stay half a mile back, just eyes. And if he runs? Then we tell Brooks which direction. And if he doesn't run? If he finishes loading those boxes and drives off to somewhere we can't follow? Knox looked at Harlan. Then we lose. And we live with it. Because the alternative is becoming exactly what Sweeney told the world we are. Harlan held his gaze. Then he reached for his helmet. I'll ride with you. No, you stay. If this goes sideways, the club needs a treasurer who isn't in a police report. Then who? Knox looked across the garage. Rio already had his helmet in his hand. Nobody's going to notice a kid on a beat-up Honda, Rio said. I'm basically invisible. Knox almost argued. Almost said the kid was too young, too hot-headed, too likely to do something stupid if the pressure spiked. But Rio was right. His bike was a nondescript Japanese commuter, not a Harley, not a cruiser, nothing that screamed motorcycle club. And Rio knew these roads better than any of them because he'd spent his teenage years running from foster placements across 3 counties on stolen bicycles. Observation, Knox said. Only. Observation. Rio pulled on his helmet. Only. They rode out of the garage into the pale winter morning. Knox on his Softail, Rio on his Honda, splitting off at the highway junction. Knox taking Route 7 north, Rio cutting through the back roads toward Carver City to approach from the east. They'd converge at the storage facility from 2 directions, maintaining distance and radio contact. Knox rode hard. The road was wet, plowed, but still slick, the asphalt streaked with salt and grit. His hands ached inside his gloves. His ribs hurt from 18 hours without sleep. His eyes burned from the cold wind streaming past his visor. His phone sat in his jacket pocket with Brooks' number cued and Hale's number saved and the weight of everything, and every confession, every testimony, every truth they'd pulled from the dark and laid on a metal desk, pressing against his chest like a second heart. 23 miles north of Blackstone, Route 7 curved through a corridor of stripped birch trees and frozen fields. The sky was the color of old steel. No sun. No clouds exactly. Just a flat, featureless gray that pressed down on the landscape like a lid. Knox's radio crackled. Rio. Eyes on the target. Black Tahoe. Carver City self-storage on Industrial Road. He's at the loading dock, trunk open. He's carrying boxes. Knox checked his speedometer, 12 miles out. How many boxes? 4 so far, moving fast. He looks scared, Knox. He keeps checking the road. Stay back. Do not let him see you. I'm behind a dumpster across the street. He can't see me. Knox twisted the throttle. The Softail surged forward, eating pavement. His phone was in his hand. He dialed Brooks. "Sheriff, it's Callahan. Dale Sweeney is at Carver City Self-Storage Industrial Road. He's loading financial records into a black Chevy Tahoe. He's preparing to flee." Brooks' voice came back sharp, alert. "How do you know this?" "I know it. Hale's office can confirm. They've been surveilling the same location. He's there right now. If he leaves with those records, the case against Ridgeline loses its foundation. I'm calling state police. Carver City is outside my jurisdiction." "Then call fast." He hung up, pushed the bike harder. Rio's voice came through the radio again, urgent now, tight. "Knox, he stopped loading. He's on his phone. He's getting in the car. He's getting in the car, Knox. He's leaving." Knox's blood went cold. "Do not follow him. He's pulling out of the lot, heading north on Industrial." "Rio, do not follow." Static. "Rio!" The radio crackled. Then Rio's voice, breathless, engine noise, roaring behind it. "I'm just watching which way he turns, that's all. Observation." "Rio, stop the bike. He's turning onto Route 7, northbound. He's accelerating. Knox, if he hits the interstate, he's gone. State police won't have a unit there for 20 minutes. Knox felt the moment crystallize around him. The exact fulcrum point where control becomes chaos, where observation becomes pursuit, where the line between doing the right thing and becoming the thing you swore you'd never be narrows to a wire stretched across a frozen highway. "Rio, listen to me. Pull over. Right now. Call me with his direction and pull over." The radio went silent. 1 second, 2, 3. Then Rio's voice, quieter. The engine noise had dropped. "Northbound Route 7, passing mile marker 34, moving fast." Knox heard the Honda's engine idle. Rio had stopped. Knox exhaled, dialed Brooks again. "Sweeney is northbound on Route 7, passing mile marker 34, black Tahoe, loaded with documents. He's heading for the interstate. State police has a unit at the Route 7 interchange. I'm radioing now." Knox slowed his bike, pulled to the shoulder, killed the engine. He sat on the side of the road in the gray winter light, with the cold eating through his jacket, and his hands shaking on the handlebars and his phone pressed to his ear, listening to the static of a radio frequency carrying commands between jurisdictions, between agencies, between the old world and whatever was about to replace it. And he waited. Because that's what it cost. That was the price of becoming something different than what Sweeney expected. Not riding, not fighting, not chasing, just sitting on the side of a frozen road, trusting the system he'd spent his entire life distrusting, believing that the law, the same law that had failed Mara, failed Eli, failed 47 families, would arrive in time to catch a man carrying the evidence of his own cruelty in the trunk of his car. Knox sat in the silence and the cold and the terrible uncertainty of surrender. And 12 miles north, at the Route 7 interchange, a state police cruiser pulled across the northbound lane with its lights flashing and its siren splitting the frozen air, and a black Chevy Tahoe loaded with 10 years of weaponized vengeance skidded to a stop on the icy pavement with nowhere left to run. The call came at 11:47 a.m. Knox was still sitting on the shoulder of Route 7 when Brooks' voice came through his phone, clipped and professional but carrying an undertone of something he'd never heard from her before. Relief. "State police has Sweeney in custody, vehicle impounded, 4 boxes of financial records, 2 external hard drives, a laptop, and a briefcase containing original loan documents for 31 borrowers." She paused. "He tried to run on foot when they pulled him over, made it about 40 yards before he slipped on ice and went down, broke his wrist." Knox closed his eyes. "Hale's investigators are en route to take possession of the evidence. She says your cooperation accelerated the timeline by months, maybe years." Another pause. "She also says to tell you that if any of your people had been within a mile of that arrest, the whole thing would have been compromised." "We weren't. I know. I'm saying it anyway." Knox sat on his bike in the gray winter light and listened to the silence after Brooks hung up. The road stretched empty in both directions. Snow had stopped falling sometime in the last hour, and the sky had lightened to a pale, exhausted white, the color of something that had spent everything it had and was resting before deciding what came next. He called Rio. "You good?" "Yeah." The kid's voice was steady, quiet. I pulled over like you said. You did the right thing. Didn't feel like it. It never does. Knox rode back to Blackstone slowly. Not because the roads were bad. The plows had cleared most of the county by now, leaving wet black asphalt edged with dirty snow walls. But because he needed the ride. Needed the cold air and the engine vibration and the simple mechanical act of balancing speed and direction and momentum. Needed to feel the road under him before he faced what was waiting. The garage was quiet when he arrived. Most of the brothers had gone home after their testimony sessions, scattered back to apartments and trailers and rented rooms across the county, each carrying the weight of what they'd disclosed and the uncertainty of what it would cost them. Bull's bike was gone. Harlan's truck sat in its usual spot, but Harlan was nowhere in sight. The back office door was closed, and through the window Knox could see the investigators packing up equipment, folding laptops into cases, winding cables, erasing the physical evidence of a morning that had dismantled 3 decades of carefully maintained silence. Catherine Hale emerged from the office carrying her leather portfolio. She looked tired in the specific way that prosecutors look tired. Not physically depleted, but mentally saturated. The fatigue of a person who has absorbed too many confessions in too short a time and needs to organize them before they blur together. She stopped when she saw Knox. Sweeney's being processed at the state police barracks in Carver City. Arraignment Monday. We're requesting no bail based on flight risk, which his little foot race on the ice conveniently demonstrated. And Grady? Brooks is building the local case. Kidnapping, assault, unlawful restraint, drug distribution. The compound evidence supports most of it. With Sweeney's records in hand, we can connect Grady's operation to the lending scheme, which elevates everything to a federal conspiracy charge. She paused. He'll lawyer up. It'll take time. But the architecture of his organization is exposed now. The shell companies, the payment structures, the coercion pipeline, it's all in those boxes. Knox nodded. The families, the 47 borrowers. Our office will initiate proceedings to void the Ridgeline contracts based on fraud and predatory terms. It won't happen overnight. Some of these families have been paying into these loans for years. They'll need financial counseling, legal representation, debt restructuring. Hale looked at him with that professional human expression that he was beginning to understand was not a contradiction, but a skill. The state can provide some of that, but most of it will have to come from the community. Knox understood what she was saying without her needing to say it. Thank you, Mr. Callahan. Don't thank me. I helped create the problem. You also helped solve it. Both things can be true. She extended her hand. He shook it. Her grip was firm and brief and carried no sentiment. Then she walked to her car and drove away, followed by the investigators and the state police captain, their vehicles crunching through the slush and disappearing onto the highway until the garage parking lot held nothing but Iron Vulture's bikes and Harlan's truck, and the silence that comes after a storm when the world hasn't decided yet what to rebuild. Knox found Harlan in the supply room behind the repair bay, sitting on an overturned 5-gallon bucket, smoking a cigarette with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a man performing a ritual rather than feeding a habit. The room smelled like motor oil and cardboard and the bitter tang of old coolant. Shelves of parts and filters and brake pads lined the walls, organized with the meticulous precision that Harlan applied to everything. Every bolt in its bin, every gasket in its sleeve, every piece of the mechanical world sorted and labeled and accounted for. Knox sat on another bucket across from him. They didn't speak for a while. 2 men in a small room surrounded by the organized guts of machines, breathing secondhand smoke and processing the landscape of a world that looked different than it had 24 hours ago. Bull called, Harlan said, from his truck. And? He's not coming back. Says he's done. Says the club voted without him, and he won't lead something he doesn't recognize anymore. Harlan tapped Ash onto the concrete floor. He'll keep his patch as an honorary, but he's stepping down as president. Knox absorbed this. It should have felt like a loss. Maybe it was, but it felt more like the sound a bone makes when it's finally set properly after being broken for years. Painful, necessary, and followed by the first real chance of healing. He's not wrong, Knox said. The club he built doesn't exist anymore. Something still does. Yeah, I just don't know what it is yet. Harlan finished his cigarette and crushed it under his boot. Go see the boy, Knox. The rest of this can wait. Knox drove to the hospital. The corridors were busier now. Daytime staff, visiting hours, the ordinary machinery of a county hospital processing ordinary miseries. He walked past the nurse's station and turned left toward Mara's room and stopped outside the door because what he saw through the window made him unable to move. Eli was sitting cross-legged on Mara's hospital bed with his superhero backpack open in front of him. He had pulled out its contents and arranged them on the blanket with the careful attention of a museum curator. A plastic action figure with one arm missing, a folded drawing on notebook paper, a broken crayon, a granola bar wrapper that was empty but apparently too important to discard, and a photograph. Small, creased, the edges soft from handling. Knox couldn't see the image from the doorway, but he could see the way Eli held it, with both hands, gently, the way you hold things that are the last of their kind. Mara was watching her son with an expression that Knox recognized because he had seen its absence for his entire childhood. It was the look of a mother who is present, not distracted by fear, not hollowed out by exhaustion, not calculating the distance between the current disaster and the next one, just present. Watching her child arrange his small treasures on a hospital blanket, as if the act itself was worth seeing. Knox knocked softly on the door frame. Mara looked up. Eli turned. "Mr. Knox!" The boy scrambled off the bed and ran to him and threw his arms around Knox's waist with a force that was disproportionate to his size. Knox felt the impact in his ribs, in his chest, in the place behind his sternum where he stored the things he wouldn't say. He put one hand on the boy's shoulder, carefully, the way you touch something precious that you're afraid of breaking by wanting it too much. "Hey, kid. Mom said I can go home tomorrow. The doctor said she's getting better." Knox looked at Mara. She nodded, a small, tired nod that contained more information than words could carry. Getting better, not better, getting. The process, not the destination. "That's good," Knox said. Eli pulled back and looked up at him with those two old eyes that had somehow, in the space of 48 hours, gotten a fraction younger. Not innocent. That was gone and wouldn't come back, Knox knew, because you can't unlearn the things that childhood violence teaches. But less guarded. The walls were still there. They were just slightly less fortified. "The bad men are gone?" Eli asked. "The bad men are gone." "Both of them? Grady and the nice man?" Knox crouched to the boy's level. "Both of them. They're in jail. They can't hurt your mom anymore." Eli considered this with the serious, methodical processing of a child who has learned to verify claims against evidence. Then he turned and walked back to the bed and picked up the photograph he'd been holding. He brought it to Knox. It was a picture of Mara and Eli at a park. Summer, sunlight. Eli was maybe 4, sitting on a swing, his head thrown back in laughter. Mara stood behind him, mid-push, her hands on his back, her face caught in an unguarded moment of pure joy. No exhaustion, no fear, no calculations. Just a mother pushing her son on a swing on a warm afternoon. "This is from before," Eli said. "Before the money problems. Before the men came." He looked at the photograph with an expression that no 6-year-old should be capable of producing. The expression of someone looking at evidence that happiness once existed and might therefore exist again. Mom was happy here. Knox looked at the photograph, then at Mara. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. She was holding it, containing it, the way she'd been containing everything for years, the fear, the pain, the humiliation, the slow erosion of her ability to believe that the world would stop taking from her. "She'll be happy again," Knox said. And for the first time in his life, he said something like that, and meant it not as a promise, but as a decision, a commitment to the specific, tangible, daily work of making it true, rather than the empty comfort of wishing it would be. Eli put the photograph back in his backpack, zipped it shut, held it against his chest. "Mr. Knox?" "Yeah?" "Are you going to go away?" The question was quiet, matter of fact, asked with the casual devastation of a child who has been left enough times to build the expectation of departure into every relationship. Knox looked at Mara. She was watching him, waiting. Not with expectation, with curiosity. The curiosity of a woman who had been let down by every system designed to help her and was genuinely interested in seeing what this man would do now that the crisis was over and the heroic part was finished, and the only thing left was the mundane, difficult, unglamorous work of showing up. "No," Knox said. "I'm not going away." 2 weeks passed. The snow melted slowly, then all at once, as winter loosened its grip on Blackstone County in that grudging, incremental way that Appalachian winters surrender. One warm afternoon at a time, each followed by a freeze that reminded everyone the cold wasn't finished, just resting. Grady's arraignment went as Hale predicted. His lawyers were expensive and aggressive and filed motions that would take months to litigate. But the evidence from the compound, combined with Sweeney's records, which turned out to be far more detailed than even Hale had hoped, built a case that the defense team couldn't outspend. The federal conspiracy charges were filed on a Wednesday. By Thursday, 2 of Grady's associates had flipped, offering testimony in exchange for reduced sentences. By the following Monday, Grady's bail was revoked after evidence surfaced that he'd been attempting to contact witnesses through an intermediary. Sweeney's case was simpler and uglier. The original Ridgeline contracts, recovered from the boxes in his Tahoe, showed systematic fraud, forged signatures on amendment documents, fabricated late fees, interest calculations that violated state usury laws by margins so wide that Hale's office described them in the filing as not errors, but architecture. 47 families, 31 with original documents in Sweeney's possession, each one a standalone case of financial predation committed under the cover of a legitimate business entity registered to a P.O. box. The state attorney general's office began the process of voiding the contracts. It was slow, bureaucratic, and deeply imperfect. Some families had already lost vehicles, furniture, savings accounts garnished through legal channels Sweeney had manipulated. The money wouldn't all come back. Some of the damage was permanent, but the bleeding stopped. And in Blackstone County, that was enough to start with. The Iron Vultures changed. Not dramatically, not with a speech or a ceremony or a vote. Just the slow daily accretion of small decisions that, taken together, added up to something that didn't have a name yet but felt different from what came before. It started with Harlan. 3 days after the testimony, he drove his truck to the Decatur Heights neighborhood, the dying blocks of brick apartments and broken streetlights where Mara and Eli had lived, and knocked on doors. Not selling anything, not recruiting, just asking. What do you need? What's broken? What hasn't worked in months that nobody's come to fix? The answers were ordinary and devastating. A furnace that hadn't worked since October, a leaking roof that had turned a bedroom ceiling into a brown, sagging map of water damage, a single mother with 3 kids who couldn't afford to replace the lock on her front door after her ex-boyfriend kicked it in. Harlan went back to the garage and told the brothers. Within a week, the Iron Vultures were running supply and repair operations across 4 neighborhoods. Not organized, not branded, not publicized, just men with tools and trucks and the specific practical competence that comes from years of keeping machines alive on no budget. Showing up, fixing things, leaving without asking for anything except a cup of coffee if one was offered. Knox converted the old storage room behind the garage into an intake office. He hated the word intake because it sounded institutional and clinical and reminded him of every VA office and social services waiting room he'd ever sat in, while a stranger with a clipboard decided whether his problems qualified for attention. But he didn't have a better word, so he used it and tried to make the reality better than the language. He put a desk in the room, a phone, a filing cabinet, a coffee maker that Deacon donated from his apartment because the garage's old one produced coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through a radiator. He taped a piece of paper to the door that read "Second Mile" in block letters, written with a marker, because he didn't have a budget for a sign. The name came from something Mara said one evening when she was helping organize the space, sorting donated winter coats by size on a folding table while Eli did homework on the floor nearby. "Most people go the first mile," she said, holding up a child's coat and checking the zipper. "The first mile is easy. It's the thing you do because someone's watching or because it makes you feel good. The second mile is the one nobody sees, the one that costs something." Knox looked at her across the room. She was thinner than the photographs on her refrigerator. The bruise on her jaw had faded to a yellow-green shadow that makeup couldn't quite cover. Her hands moved with the efficient, no-wasted motion rhythm of a woman who had spent years working double shifts at a diner where efficiency meant survival. She'd quit the Double Arrow 3 days ago. Knox had offered her the job of managing the outreach operation because she knew the community, knew the families, knew the specific geography of need in Blackstone County better than any biker ever could. She'd hesitated, not because she didn't want it, but because accepting help from the people connected to the man who'd trapped her felt like a contradiction she couldn't resolve. Knox understood. He didn't push. She'd shown up the next morning anyway, without explanation, carrying a legal pad full of names and addresses she'd compiled from memory. Families she knew from the diner, from Eli's school, from the laundromat, from the shared infrastructure of poverty that connected people who couldn't afford to be strangers. That was Mara. She resolved contradictions by working through them, not around them. The outreach grew. Not fast, not smoothly. There were arguments about scope, about resources, about whether the Iron Vultures had any business positioning themselves as community support when half the county still remembered them as the bikers who used to run with criminals. A town council member wrote an op-ed in the Blackstone Courier calling the Second Mile program reputation laundering by an outlaw motorcycle gang. Harlan read it aloud at the garage and laughed so hard he started coughing. Knox read it and didn't laugh because the criticism wasn't entirely wrong, and the things that aren't entirely wrong are the ones that require attention. But the work continued, because the furnaces still needed fixing and the locks still needed replacing and the family still needed someone to show up with a truck full of groceries when the first of the month was 10 days away and the pantry was empty. Bull sent a check. No note. No return address. Just a cashier's check for $12,000 made out to Second Mile Outreach with a memo line that read, "For the kids." Knox deposited it without comment. Harlan cried in the supply room for 5 minutes and then came out and pretended he'd been looking for a socket wrench. Rio became Eli's unofficial guardian at the garage. The 26-year-old foster kid and the 6-year-old boy developed a bond that Knox watched from a distance with the careful attention of a man studying something he didn't fully understand but recognized as important. Rio taught Eli how to identify engine parts by sound. Eli taught Rio how to fold paper airplanes that actually flew. They communicated in the shorthand of people who understood impermanence, short sentences, direct eye contact, no promises about tomorrow, just the reliable fact of being present today. Deacon set up a first aid station in the corner of the garage and stocked it with supplies from the VA hospital where he volunteered on Thursdays. He checked Eli's hands and feet every time the boy came in from outside, a habit left over from the night he'd first examined the child for frostbite, a habit he showed no interest in breaking. Slade built a small wooden bench and placed it outside the garage door, facing the street. He didn't explain why. Knox understood anyway. It was a place to sit, a place to watch, a place where someone who needed to rest could stop walking for a minute and know that the building behind them contained people who would notice if they didn't get up again. 3 weeks after the storm, on a cold evening in mid-December, the town of Blackstone gathered outside the garage for a holiday supply drive that Mara had organized with a ferocity that surprised everyone except Knox. She'd called every business in the county, written letters to 3 regional charities, and personally visited 17 families to tell them what was available and where to find it. She did all of this while managing the outreach office, raising Eli, and navigating the legal proceedings that required her to testify in depositions 3 times in 2 weeks about things she would rather have forgotten. She didn't forget them. She metabolized them, turned them into fuel. Knox admired this about her in a way he kept private because admiration felt too close to something else, and he wasn't ready to look at something else yet. Maybe he would be someday. Maybe not. The point wasn't the destination. The point was not running. The evening of the supply drive, white string lights were draped across the motorcycles parked in a row outside the garage. Someone, Rooster probably, had strung them without asking, creating a canopy of warm light that turned the chrome and leather into something that looked less like an outlaw fleet and more like a strange mechanical constellation. Fire barrels burned at intervals along the sidewalk, their heat drawing families in from the cold streets, creating small circles of warmth where strangers stood beside each other and watched their breath rise and disappear. Knox stood apart from it. He leaned against the garage wall near the corner where the building met the alley his jacket zipped, his hands around a cup of coffee that Mara had pressed into his grip 20 minutes ago with a look that said, "Drink this. You look like you're about to fall over," without using any words at all. The coffee was good. Not garage coffee. Something she'd brewed in the new maker, with real grounds and the right ratio of water to coffee, and the attention to craft that she brought to everything she touched. He watched the crowd. Families he didn't know, collecting coats and canned goods from folding tables staffed by bikers who looked uncomfortable smiling and did it anyway. Kids chasing each other around the fire barrels. A woman in her 70s holding a bag of groceries with both arms and crying quietly while Harlan pretended not to notice and carried a second bag to her car. This was it. This was the thing, not the rescue, not the raid, not the testimony or the legal maneuvering or the high-octane confrontation that makes a story feel like a story. This, the after, the showing up. The Tuesday afternoon of fixing a stranger's furnace and the Wednesday morning of driving donated food to an address that doesn't have a working doorbell. The slow, uncinematic, deeply ordinary work of being present in a place where presence is the scarcest resource. Knox sipped his coffee and felt the warmth spread through his chest and understood that this feeling, this quiet, imperfect, slightly uncomfortable feeling of being connected to something larger than his own damage, was what he'd been riding away from for 20 years. He hadn't known it was this. He'd thought connection was a trap, a debt, a vulnerability that would be exploited by people who knew how to find the soft places and press until they bruised. He'd built his life around the avoidance of exactly this, the warmth, the proximity, the terrifying arithmetic of caring about people who could be taken away. And now he was standing in it. And it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like the opposite of a trap, which he didn't have a word for because his vocabulary had been shaped by decades of defense, and the language of defense doesn't include many terms for the experience of putting your weapons down. Then Eli appeared. The boy came running through the crowd with something held above his head, a piece of cardboard, rectangular, covered in crayon marks. He dodged between adults, ducked under someone's arm, nearly tripped over a fire barrel hose, and skidded to a stop in front of Knox with the breathless, red-cheeked urgency of a child who has made something and cannot wait one more second for it to be seen. "I made this." He held up the sign. It was cardboard, cut from a shipping box, ragged at the edges, slightly bent in the middle, where it had been folded and unfolded multiple times. The crayon work was meticulous in the way that 6-year-old craftsmanship is meticulous. Enormous effort, imperfect execution, absolute sincerity. The letters were uneven, some too large, some squeezed together where he'd run out of space, the colors alternating between blue and red and a shade of orange that had been pressed so hard it left waxy ridges on the cardboard. "The bikers who stopped my mom from crying." Knox read it. He read it again. He read it a third time because his eyes had stopped working properly. The letters blurring, the colors swimming, the edges of the cardboard dissolving into the warm light from the string lights, and the fire barrels, and the glow of a town that was, against all evidence and expectation, beginning to mend. He couldn't speak. Eli watched him with those eyes. Still too old, still carrying the sediment of things a child shouldn't know, but lighter now. Not innocent. Never again innocent. But something adjacent to it. Something that grows in the space where innocence was destroyed if the soil is tended carefully enough and the people doing the tending show up more than once. "Do you like it?" Eli asked. Knox crouched down. His knees hit the cold pavement. He was eye level with the boy now, close enough to see the crayon residue on Eli's fingers and the small scar on his chin from a fall last year and the impossible, stubborn hope in his expression. "Yeah," Knox said. His voice broke on the word and he didn't care. "I like it." Eli smiled, a real smile. Not the cautious, conditional, ready-to-retract smile of a child who has learned to ration joy. A real one. The kind that uses the whole face and doesn't hold anything back. Then he stepped forward and hugged Knox around the neck with both arms, pressing his face into Knox's shoulder, and Knox put his arms around the boy and held him, and closed his eyes, and let the warmth of that small body settle into the frozen architecture of everything he'd built to keep the world out. The crowd had gone quiet. Not silent. There were still conversations, still the crackle of the fire barrels, still the background noise of a community event in a small town in winter. But the immediate vicinity had stilled. People had turned. People were watching. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was cinematic, because it was real. A man who had spent his life riding away from attachment, holding a child who had walked through a blizzard to find him. Both of them broken, neither of them fixed. But standing together in the space between those two things, which turned out to be large enough to build something in. Mara stood near the folding tables, 10 feet away, watching. Tears ran down her face. Not the tears Knox had spent this entire story trying to stop. Not the tears of fear, of desperation, of a woman drowning in a system designed to hold her underwater. These were different. These came from the same place but carried different weight. The weight of relief, of recognition, of a woman seeing her son held by someone who intended to stay, and allowing herself for the first time in longer than she could remember to believe that the world contained people who showed up for the second mile. Knox looked at her over Eli's shoulder. Their eyes met across the cold air and the string lights and the smoke rising from the fire barrels. And something passed between them that neither of them named, because naming it would make it fragile, and they were both too tired of fragile things. It wasn't romance. It wasn't gratitude. It was recognition. The look of two people who understood each other's damage with a specificity that didn't require explanation. Knox gave her a small nod. She nodded back. That was enough. For now, that was enough. Eli eventually pulled away and ran back into the crowd, holding his sign above his head, showing it to anyone who would look. Rooster crouched down to read it and gave the boy a fist bump. Slade took a photograph with his phone. Deacon ruffled the boy's hair with one massive hand, gentle as surgery. Rio intercepted Eli near the fire barrels and produced a small leather vest from behind his back. Child-sized. Cut from scrap leather at the garage by hands that were better with engines than fashion, but had tried anyway. On the back, hand-stitched in careful block letters, "Second Mile." Eli put it on over his coat. It was too big. The shoulders drooped. The hem hung past his hips. He looked ridiculous and magnificent, and entirely himself. A boy wearing the wrong-sized armor of people who had decided he was worth protecting. Standing in the glow of a repurposed biker garage on a cold December evening, holding a cardboard sign that said, "More about the human capacity for repair than any speech Knox had ever heard." Knox straightened up. His knees ached. His back was stiff. His eyes were wet, and he didn't wipe them because he was done hiding the evidence of feeling things. He looked at the garage, at the Second Mile sign taped to the door, at the motorcycles draped in white lights, at the brothers, his brothers, standing among families they were learning to serve instead of intimidate, awkward and imperfect and trying. He thought about his mother, about the bathroom door, about the sounds she made that he couldn't stop, and the silence that came after that was worse. He thought about the 8-year-old version of himself lying on a floor mattress in a house that smelled like whiskey, believing he was the cause of everything. He didn't forgive that house. He didn't forgive his father. Some things don't get forgiven. They get survived, and survival creates its own kind of authority. The authority to say, "I know what this costs because I've paid it, and I'm choosing to spend what's left on something better." Knox finished his coffee. The cup was empty, but he held it for another moment because Mara had given it to him, and the warmth it had left on his palms was worth holding. Then he set the cup on the windowsill and walked into the crowd. Not away from it, into it, toward the fire barrels where Eli was showing his sign to a group of kids who were asking what Second Mile meant. Toward Harlan, who was laughing at something Rooster had said while simultaneously doing math in a small notebook, because Harlan was always doing math. Toward Deacon, who stood near the supply tables with his hands in his pockets and his medic bag at his feet, watching the perimeter out of habit, protecting the gathering without anyone asking him to. Toward all of it. The noise and the cold and the imperfect, chaotic, deeply human mess of people trying to be better than the things that made them. Snow began to fall again, lightly, softly. Not the weaponized blizzard of 2 weeks ago, but something gentler. The kind of snowfall that collects on shoulders and eyelashes and makes the world look quieter than it is. Knox walked through it with his hands in his jacket pockets and his collar up and the sounds of the gathering washing over him like something he'd been listening for his whole life without knowing what it was. Behind him, the garage lights glowed warm against the December dark. Ahead of him, a 6-year-old boy in an oversized leather vest was laughing, and Knox Callahan, former Marine, road captain, enforcer, survivor, and the man who finally stopped riding away, walked toward the sound. Not because it erased the past, but because it proved the past was not the only thing he was made of.